Welcome back, SMITE fans, to the SMITE Pro League, powered by our good friends over at Prime Gaming. If you don't have yourself a Prime membership just yet, make sure you pick that up so that way you can get free shipping, music, movies, and more with that Prime membership. You got all the stuff that you were wanting to buy. Now you don't got to go out on places. You can get it in 2 days. For that, with the free shipping. Good Lord, I'm already losing my train of words. We just started the day. And then you can also link that to your Twitch account and get all the great rewards from Prime Gaming. So all the free stuff you got with Prime membership, now add games and content in games that you may have already been playing out there. New games come out every single month, and new content comes out just about weekly from stuff that you can grab there. So make sure that you link up your Prime membership with your Twitch to get Twitch Prime for yourself. Thank you so much for Prime Gaming for being the title sponsor of Season 9 of the SMITE Pro League. I'm J-Mac. I got Mifflin joining me, and we've got an explosive day to start out. It's going to be the Olympus Bolts and the Camelot Kings, our top 2 teams of the league, squaring off on this lovely Saturday.
Yeah, I am so excited for this matchup. I love watching the Camelot Kings play because I think they are the closest SMITE team to just playing chess at all times. Watching them play the map legitimately is watching someone devise strategy. It's almost like tracking a war, you know what I mean? And then you have the Olympus Bolts, who are just a bombastic squad of fun-having lads that go towards some, at times, eclectic picks. I'm talking about Awesome Jake. Just an important matchup, to be sure, first and second seed, but a fun one nonetheless.
Yeah, starting our day with our number 1 and 2 seeds, respectively, with the Bolts and the Kings, and then we'll round out our day with the Atlantis Leviathans and the Valhalla Valkyries. And then guess what? The Leviathans get to come back again to kick off our triple header Sunday. And taking a look at the standings, as mentioned, the Olympus Bolts and the Kings, formerly undefeated before last week it happened, and now with a loss against the Leviathans by both of them, have put a 1 in that loss column for the 2 of them, but still sitting at the top of the standings nonetheless at that 1 and 2. And talking about these teams, especially the growth that these players individually have had. You know, whenever we talk to some of these players before pre-game interviews come out, post-game interviews, even just talking with them, a lot of the talk around these 2 teams have been around their junglers. LASBRA has really been able to step up for his team this year. Everybody on the Bolts has been able to make that step up, but it's that thing that we talked about a lot in phase number 1. We'll continue to talk about in phase 2 is when LASBRA is having a good game, the Olympus Bolts look nigh unstoppable.
And those good games are coming much more often than they had over the last couple of phases. I mean, in the last few years, he's talked about as one of the most inconsistent components of the Olympus Bolts. I'd argue LASBRA has been having himself a phenomenal 2022 so far, has found a couple of picks that serve him very well, the Erlong Shen, the initiator role style of play. I like it when he's just first one in, last one out, or even first one in, first one out. As long as he's finding these multi-man taunts or these multi-man pins, the good CC combos, the rest of the Olympus Bolts are always right behind him. But with that said, when LASBRA is forced down out of these initiators, when it's not the Osirises, the Erlongs, the Dajis, the things that could just start the fight for the team, I've seen the Olympus Bolts struggle at times. So I wonder if the Camelot Kings have taken notice of that, and whether or not LASBRA is going to be the recipient of a whole lot of bans.
And it does reflect in the picks that LASBRA has been going towards. In his last 6 games, just about every single one is some kind of initiation and facilitator style role, whether that be things like the Gilgamesh or the Erlong Shen, or you get Daji and Osiris thrown in there. So LASBRA has had his hands full making sure to pick up a lot of these warriors more than anything else, to try and be that facilitator for his team, to try and get those team fights started, to try and stick around during those team fights as well with this more bruiser style of build. And up against them, someone who's been doing something very similar. The only real difference in the god pools between them is the fact that CaptainTwig over on the Camelot Kings has added his Vamana to his book. And it's something that came out right at the tail end of Masters. We saw Ymir bring it out over for the Valhalla Valkyries, and CaptainTwig has adapted this god into his pool, and he's been doing really well with it.
Yeah, more of a counter selection, the Vamana, that is, for CaptainTwig. You walk into something that's got heavy CC or someone that really just doesn't want someone sticking close to you. that's when you lock in the Vamana. Colossal Fury, just an unstoppable behemoth on the battlefield. Really, the only thing stopping him is anti-heal. Ankh has been a very early answer more often than not when he does go towards that pick. Otherwise, as you said, a good deal of carryover between both of these players' god pools. The Erlong Shen, the Osiris, has served them both very well over the last couple of weeks. I would argue, though, Twig does have a similar playstyle. They're both initiators, but Twig's also got one more piece to his god pool that I think brings him slightly over the edge. He can always be an initiator because Osiris is getting banned. Erlong Shen's getting banned. Who in their right mind is banning Hun bots? I'd argue nobody. And sometimes how Twig plays it, it's starting to look like it might need to get banned.
Yeah, Hunbats has been kind of sneaking his way back into some of these players' god pools. I mean, when we had the re-rise of Assassins back in Season 8, CaptainTwig was one of the first people who was bringing that Hunbats back to the battlefield. Eventually started warranting some bans at that time, but I think you're right to mention that it kind of feels awkward to ban a Hunbats when there's so much else out there. Mercury, Nemesis, kind of the top of the auto-attack style of junglers. BaRRaCCuDDa is something that also CaptainTwig has added to his wheelhouse as of recent too. So CaptainTwig kind of all over the place with his god selections, whether he wants to be that straight auto-attack assassin, whether he goes to the auto-attack warrior ability. He's got just about everything in his pool at this point.
He does. A very adaptable player. And when we've talked to the Kings in the past, they bring up their adaptability as one of their greatest assets. The meta changes, they change with it. The god pools change, they change with it. And that not only makes them a good team regardless of patch, but it also makes it so difficult for these other squads in the SPL to figure out what they need to address. Hey, we banned out the Vamana. Good luck, Twig. I've got like 5 more picks. Hey, BigManTingz is playing on ping. Let's go ahead and get the easy execution gods out of the way. Unfortunately, he's still capable of executing, regardless of where he's playing.
The Camelot Kings a very talented squad, and we got a moment to sit down with CaptainTwig and kind of pick his brain as to how he thinks that his team is doing for this phase. We'll throw it over to that interview real quick.
Our biggest strength as a team is definitely team play. We have 5 people who all can do their job perfectly in a team fight, especially Harry with our front line, Genetics with our support play, knowing when to dive and when to peel. If we play, our biggest strength is just playing a team fight properly, as each role is meant to kind of do in SMITE. Our biggest weakness as a team is probably when we get really greedy with calls, especially if we have a small lead. I think if we were playing against Bolts and I could use 5 bans, I'd use them all on Jake or LASBRA, kind of a shout out, but Jake, because he's very good at his specific god pool. And he kind of does more than any other support on those specific gods, and it's kind of hard to beat. It's a real facilitator for his team. I don't think anyone had any reservations with Haddix, LASBRA, BaRRa, or Ven and their skill level. And I think the way that Bolts can get better is Jake stepping up, playing individually good, no more int plays from the previous seasons, they just need him to be a consistent frontliner in every fight, basically, and I think he has stepped up the most. The early game's probably the hardest against Bolts. They play very well, their lanes are aggressive, they pick pressure, and LASBRA is maybe the best jungler in the league right now at getting early ganks and early pick plays done with his fantastic god pool.
CaptainTwig, the jungler for the Camelot Kings, showing a lot of respect over to the dual lane and the jungle of the Olympus Bolts, and especially over to Awesome Jake. I mean, when we ask, who do you want to spend 5 bans? Typically, you don't ever really want to have to use all 5 of your bans on one player, but asking him like that is kind of a question of who do you put the most respect to on the team. And we've seen a lot of people actually talking about the supports more often. And I think CaptainTwig brings up a good point, is that Jake is really, really good at the 4 or 5 gods that he has truly mastered, and trying to put him out of his comfort zone might be one of the best calls for the Camelot Kings.
And I would argue maybe there's a bit of top-end weight to Jake's god pool. When I think of Jake, Yemoja jumps in my mind. I'm like, man, I really don't want to deal with the 408 Yemoja. And I also think at times of the Nox. I don't want to play against anybody's Nox, but specifically not Jake. So no surprise that the Camelot Kings showing a whole lot of respect to Jake as a player. He has been a phenomenal initiator for his team. And I think Twig really talks about what the major step up was, which was originally Jake was a player newer to the league who had gotten over aggressive at times. We call him int plays. He just seemed to be walking in when he shouldn't be. I don't remember the last time Jake's really done that. He has cleaned up his play almost entirely.
Yeah, he definitely has, and it's been a massive showing for the Olympus Bolts to really bring everybody together in that. And you heard him say at the end, there hasn't really been reservations on the rest of the team as to how good they are. It's just, when was Jake going to make that step up play? Well, here in Season 9, Jake has made that step, and it's so much that he's even eating a couple of bans, not just from his team, but also from the Camelot Kings. A roundup on the bans: Artio, Khepri, and Yemoja by the Olympus Bolts. The Kings take away Xingqian, Chernobog, and the Morrigan. A little bit of respect over towards Venenu with that pick there. That leaves the Osiris open for the Olympus Bolts, and that is a contested pick between both of the junglers of these teams.
Yeah, it seemed like the Bolts knew exactly what they wanted. That was a quick ban and first pick for the Olympus Bolts. Bodes well for them if they are able to set out their strategy and execute on it as quickly as they had. Good early presence regardless of where this Osiris lands. Mannequin Scepter in the jungle doesn't feel so bad. You want to take him over towards the solo lane, he'll hold his own there as well. So the Olympus Bolts only really showing the fact that there is an Osiris in this draft with their first pick overall. Genetics haven't taken a whole lot of bans already. Yemoja and Khepri from the Olympus Bolts. Could be that we see them prioritize a Guardian selection here, trying to take away from Awesome Jake. Instead, it's King Arthur and Jing Wei for the Camelot Kings. Pressure over in your solo lane, survivability in the duo.
Something for Variety to be a bully player on, and that's typically where the Kings find a lot of success over in that lane, is when Variety is able to get these gods like Bellona, like King Arthur, get some of that pressure in the solo lane, and really kind of put Haddix on the back foot. And that's been another key player for the Olympus Bolts, has been Haddix. Extremely consistent in that solo lane. I can't recall the last time that I've seen Haddix go negative in a game at any time in recent memory. And so if the Kings can find something to fight over in that solo lane to really make sure that Haddix has to be fighting at a deficit, could be a benefit to them. The Jing Wei has just been a top pick ever since the Masters lane came around with the 9.5 changes that came through. So no surprise seeing that picked up by the Kings. And now over to the Olympus Bolts. They've got, this flexibility with the Osiris, though more often that has been going over to LASBRA. I wonder if they're maybe going to pick up their mid laner early on, or maybe give Venenu a little better look at the draft before he has to make one of his picks.
Yeah, Ven has been holding off on his pick a little bit more often recently. It seems to be a common thread for all the mid laners in the last couple of patches. This is the Olympus Bolts, so I'd be remiss to not bring up the fact that Nox is out there and available, and certainly an option for them. I feel like that's got to make you the villain of the league, right? Like if we're talking about Nox just when you're playing, you gotta be a villain.
I mean, we've talked about this to death at this point, that Jake is the villain of the league because of the Nox, and now he's got the Chronos pendant that he brought up into the league.
Dude, he ruined ranked.
Yeah, I can't really call him the villain, necessarily a villain for bringing Chronos pendant in. Obviously, that was from what the players
he's
are
a
saying.
villain.
That's
yeah,
been
we're
through.
right.
But no, he's got the Nox back up, and with the Cthulhu picked up as well for the Bolts. This Osiris will be going over to LASBRA in the jungle, but Villain's going to take his #1 villain god.
Yeah, he's a super villain, man. Not only is he bringing Nox into all my support ranked games, but now all these guys are locking in Chronos Pendant, first slot, just getting absolutely dominated. I get to play the game from behind the second I load in, because my team's the one who's the 408 fanboys. This guy's ruining ranked, bro, but has been serving him very well at the SPL level of play.
Yeah.
And now we've got a much better look at how the Olympus Bolts draft is going to round out. Osiris very likely headed for the jungle, Cthulhu over towards solo, and Nox has always been the support selection for the Olympus Bolts. Kali rounds out the top 3 for the Camelot Kings. I'm looking at team fight presence for the Olympus Bolts. That's a conversation every time you have a Cthulhu on your team. And I'm looking at late game scaling for the Kings. I don't remember the last time I've seen Twig playing Kali.
It's been a few weeks. I believe back in week 1, he was able to break this guy out, had a pretty standout performance there. I think it was like a 4-1 game that he was able to. It was a slow start, obviously, as most games are for Kali, and then once he got to late game, able to really rip through. And Kali, one of those proponents of being able to pick up a kin size, so great for trying to deal with the Cthulhu, if you have to be the one to do so there. Got to bring up, we'll go back to Jake for a moment on Nox. 82% win rate on this god on the 11 games that he's played it so far. So not only is he playing it, he's playing it well and getting a lot of wins with that for his team. So yeah, I think villain of the league is a safe bet there. We go back to the banning phase for the Kings and the Bolts, the second wave. Artemis and Ymir taken away. And that Ymir might seem kind of out there, but Genetics has been playing lights out on this god. Probably the best Ymir in the league just from what we've seen in these first few weeks of phase 2.
Yeah, the Bolts, we didn't get to hear what they would have used 5 bans on, but they do have 4, and they are all towards Genetics. Geb rounds out the second phase of bans, so Genetics have to go a little bit deeper into his god pool, but Ganesh, I don't think he's feeling too pressured. Ganesha is just fine. Has some decent matchups into individual picks. Osiris, once he channels that tether, if Ganesha can lock him down with the remove obstacles, makes it very easy for every other member of the Camelot Kings to break that stun. Nox, to a certain extent, you're channeling Shadowlock. Ganesh walks up, says, "You can't speak." All of a sudden, Shadowlock isn't happening anymore. So I'm not opposed to this pick, and it does bring you a good deal of objective burn potential. You've already got an auto-attack jungler thanks to this Kali. Jing will be going towards crit, which means the second she's got that online, you could be talking about some early Gold Furies.
I remember back in Season 8, I got a chance to actually talk to Genetics in a post-game interview where in that same set, there were 7 support bans. Specifically, there was 5 banned from the team that they were up against. I don't remember which team they were facing. There were 5 bans from there. His team had made 1 support ban. And then it was a support pick, technically. So 7 gods taken away from Genetics. He picks up Cerberus support that game, pops off and shows that it doesn't matter how deep the god pool is. And I remember asking him at in the post-game interview, I said, "Man, how does it feel that so many targeted bans are going your way?" He says, "I'm playing on ping. It's a tilter that they're focusing me of all people, but I'm still winning, so I guess just keep doing it if you want to."
And he's not playing on ping anymore. So here's the thing. It ain't going to work. It didn't work then, probably won't work now. That said, the Olympus Bolts top of the leaderboard for a reason. So they're playing their own game. A slight deviation from the standard for the Olympus Bolts. It's been a while since they've locked in something like the Olorun, but when you think about the space control that their composition already has, generally the weakness of Olorun is, oh god, they're on top of me, what do I do? How do they get on top of you when Osiris and Cthulhu are playing goaltender and you've got a Nox for Peel in your backline? Going to be a very difficult to execute dive for the Camelot Kings. I like both these drafts a lot. Both of them speak uniquely and distinctly towards both of these teams. Cover up the names, that's a Kings draft. Cover up the names, that's a Bolts draft. Both teams playing their own game. It's going to be an exciting match.
Yeah, we're looking at a lot of the team fight. As you mentioned, a ton of peel that can at least help this AMC and this Olorun. Olorun himself having his own form of self-peel with that sanctified field. So I'm looking at the Kings draft. When you see Olorun, you think of gods that would be able to get to Olorun, such as Cthulhu or Vamana as a potential lock in there. Do the Camelot Kings, with the draft that they have put together now, have any way of getting to this Olorun, have any way of getting to this AMC? If the team fight is the name of the game for the Bolts, but scaling to the Kings, I mean, which one ultimately is going to be the one to come out on top?
I mean, there are answers to the Olorun. It's a goofy answer, but like Home Sweet Home's like kind of a channeled CC immunity that you could just run down somebody with. It's similar in execution to a Vamana, but more difficult in that you aren't a Vamana, so you're not exactly all that tanky. There are answers, to be sure. You could wait for the Sanctified Field to go down, disengage. This is an Olympus Bolts draft that I think is very reliant on the initiation. If Descent into Madness and Sanctified Fields are down and you haven't already removed 1 or 2 members of the Camelot Kings, you probably just lose the team fight immediately afterward. So I think this match is going to be decided a whole lot by macro play, who establishes the lead early on, who's getting the defensive positioning around the objectives. If it's the Bolts, good luck fighting into that. I don't want to walk into Sanctified Fields or Descent into Madness. If it's the Camelot Kings getting a lead early on, I don't really care if you're Descended into Madness because my Kali is a literal chainsaw on the battleground. This one could go either way.
How do you kind of feel about this Baba Yaga? Because it's a pick that we see a lot during the SCC, especially over in the EU region. Players like Zeros really love going towards this pick. We see a lot of this over in the lower ends of play, but we haven't seen very much Baba Yaga at the top end. I know that we've been seeing a lot more of the Warlock, the Book of Thoth kind of popping through, but how do you kind of feel about this god for the Kings?
I feel like Baba Yaga is in an interesting spot in that she's got really good damage output, which is the main thing I look towards in a mage. Is she able to put out DPS? And the answer is just yes in Baba Yaga's situation. But she has got a couple of glaring weaknesses as well. Fall behind, your ultimate just won't win DPS trades, which means you aren't allowed to use the ultimate. It's kind of similar to Shiva in that regard. Start dancing, who cares? You do a lot of damage, but it takes too long. So if you're behind on Baba Yaga, could struggle there. And also that leap is just so telegraphed.
The number 1 Olympus Bolts, the number 2 Camelot Kings. Who's going to flip the standings? We got to find out first, though, in game number 1.
It's the matchup we've been waiting all phase for, Kings versus Bolts. Up until last weekend, both of these two squads undefeated Leviathans, handing both their first loss. But the Bolts and the Kings score 2 teams that play with slightly different play styles. When I think of these two, I think of the clean-cut, like, rich kid villain from the movies. Like, they do everything right, and that's the Camelot Kings. They're very methodical.
Like the one, like they always have like the smarmy lip,
right?
Okay,
Yeah,
I know what you're talking about.
This is gonna sound real bad for the Kings, and I'll hold this thought as Genetics walks in. And it looks like, I'm trying to figure out exactly. All right, so Jake and BaRRaCCuDDa were the ones invading. I was all turned around. Jake and Barra invading purple buff. Unsuccessful. And it'll get dropped down for Netrioid. But Netrioid misses the experience from the purple buff camp, so...
But Barra and Jake didn't get
they don't
a green
get it
buff
either.
or a purple buff
or a
at this
purple
point.
buff.
So,
a unique start. That doesn't mean much, I guess.
no one hits level 2. No one's allowed to have fun over here. I think genetics, again, plays that well. Look, you've got a hog. I really, embrace using it in that kind of circumstance because first wave of spawns right now after 9-5, they're a little easier to kill than the rest of the jungle respawns. And so if you have it, usually you're not using it at that initial, blowout. You're not going into the first camp thinking, gotta slaughter him, gotta kill him fast. But in that case, you save it, you strip away experience, and you stop the bolts from being comfortable in lane. Netrioid gets an experience lead just by metrics of all the farm that he had. It's a little bit over Barra, but it's going to give him enough that he should hit 5 first, things like that.
I suppose that means Jake maybe a slight edge over genetics at the moment. To go back to the
villains.
The villains.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't like the Kings don't strike me as like a villainous squad, but I'm in a Top Gun mood, so I look at like the Iceman versus Maverick, right?
Yeah.
Like the clean cut, very well trained, makes very few mistakes style of player and Iceman. And then the Maverick who's a bit more gung-ho, a bit more rugged, but it's like a tale as old as time, Gore. Like the scrappy kind of underdog style of squad taking on the clean cut, very difficult to beat team. And so I'm excited to see which style of play ends up winning the day here in our first set.
That one, all I can think of is like the team that plays it by the book and the team that plays it by heart, right? Like, maybe doesn't even apply fully here. Because I think both of these teams, much like you said, right, where the Kings will be and are a team that are very much adept at adaptation,
right?
Which is a very interesting sentence. I also think it's fun to talk about. The desk had mentioned it a little bit, but BigManTingz playing the first BaRRaCCuDDa that we've gotten to see this phase, although it's not the first BaRRaCCuDDa we've seen in competitive SMITE because it's been a lot in the EU SCC. And I think it's even funnier that the minute he goes back to Europe is when he starts to play it.
Yep.
It's like he probably maybe in some of the ranked games saw it, if not maybe in just some of the SCC games, some of their scrims, where it happens to come from. It doesn't matter as much, but they managed to get that in there. And I like BaRRaCCuDDa. I think in this meta, it might be the strongest one for her. I know Hurry tried to play her and successfully played her, what was that, last year or 2 years ago. Looked pretty good in a lot of circumstances when we got to see the BaRRaCCuDDa then. But now, you've got someone whose passive allows you to stack a little faster in a meta where you're not really fighting early on, so you can stack those items anyway. And so I like seeing Tings pick this up. It's not one that you expect to be crazy explosive in the mid lane, moderately safe with the Cauldron, has some decent range on it. That's something that always ends up catching some players off guard. That first ability, specifically the Y shape, goes just a little further than you think. And so it's always that question of whether or not you're truly safe if you're super low health. But for the most part, everything about her is a mage. The hardest thing about her over the last couple of years has been great late game mage in a meta that did not really support people getting the late game.
Right.
Now you get to late game. Kings play late game anyway, so I think this is going to be a fun power curve to watch.
Yeah, meta that works in that direction anyway. Yeah. Has been a lot of Warlock staff to start, but looks like Book of Thoth for BigManTingz early on.
Watch him just not stack anything now.
Not stack anything at all.
There's got to be like at least a Charon's coin or
That's
something.
got to be a misplay if you don't stack anything. Though I try to think, when Book of Thoth was like the star item, that was like Book of the Dead meta, right?
Because you got like a ton of mana that built up, and then when you got Book of the Dead with like a breastplate, you were just too tanky to kill.
Right, and so my mind opens that up as a possibility with this style of start from BigManTingz instead of the Warlock staff, but withhold judgment until a couple of items in and see where the BaRRaCCuDDa ends up going. Ven needs to do some scaling as well. He'll start Transcendence, though. CaptainTwig able to get active early in the game. Blue buff invade from the Olympus Bolts as a tether out onto Variety in First Blood. That is simple for the Olympus Bolts. They don't get the blue buff. They end up grabbing First Blood, though BigManTingz is rotated out of mid lane. Where's all this damage coming from? LASBRA is just wailing away on targets. He's got Stone Cutting Sword first. And that's given him heaps of damage, and the Bolt's off to a 2-0 start.
I mean, that is, like you said, a lot of damage. I think unexpected from LASBRA, but also just the play. I mean, 50 physical power, that's going to be a lot, but you're decreasing prot, so you're hitting harder with every single one, making yourself tankier, but we can ignore that half for it right now because there wasn't a lot of return damage in that fight. He was just running at them, and I think it's positioning, right? Twig almost ends up giving them a third kill just because of trying to come back in, but that's kind of the downside, right? You've got this Baba Yaga who can hit pretty hard right now, but it takes a little time to come online. Kali, who can play pretty well right now, but still wants a little more time to come online fully. And then the King Arthur, who, while he can be a bully, is going to struggle up against someone like this Osiris, who has a really good early game with a really good build so far from LASBRA. And yes, it's just one item, but it gives him the power, the chase down he needs. That, plus the disruption, and admittedly some of the good damage from a Cthulhu. And it just really set him up. I mean, those knockups were on point. It's really good ult from Haddix. And so the two of them combined just in a good spot with unfortunate positioning for the Kings where there was no escape.
Yep. How can you push that lead now if you're Haddix? Look, keeping Variety behind on this King Arthur is never an easy task. Variety's so talented on King Arthur, not only in the laning phase, but later in the game. Expect disruption, expect big plays at some point. And so that's a good place for the Bolts to try to put some pressure. You got Conduit Gem on Cthulhu, and you're able to maybe get the right of way in that lane with a little assistance from LASBRA.
The thing I'm looking at for the Kings more than anything, but it applies to the Bolts equally as well, because the Kings, in my mind, is the kind of draft that you admittedly, like, you just want to put it in the oven for a little bit, right?
Yeah.
You know, put it on high 350 for 18 minutes, and then when you pull it out, it's going to be solid. Because a lot of it is, you know, like Netrioid should be fine, Genetics, again, should be fine. All of them, though, you know, from top to bottom, even though King Arthur can be a lane bully, things like that, scale so well into that late game team fight. And it feels like when they hit that point, it's going to be fine for them. So the question isn't going to be, can they recover from this game? Because I think no matter what, this draft will make that happen. It's what is the Bolts lead, what does the game state look like when they hit that point? Because if it's close to even, then the Kings are going to just hit a power spike that all of a sudden gives them everything that they could want here, unless you get some just stellar team fights, clean play, and with no mistakes from the Bolts towards the late game. Whereas right now, I like what the Bolts are doing. Use the fact that you have this Nox, that you have an Osiris, that you have an AMC, like people that can really leverage these first 6 to 15 minutes and really try to get that pressure, get your gold lead up, and do whatever you can to make sure that when they hit late game, you still have an advantage.
I wonder if Jake ends up going Chronos Pendant after the Thieves, because Jake has been hellbent on making Chronos Pendant work on most of the supports. You bring up Nox, the ability to help get active and get aggressive movements going for the Olympus Bolts. Already a 2-level lead over Genetics, and literally nothing has happened on the left side of the map outside of a unique start, but Jake 2 levels ahead of this Ganesh, so equal in levels with Netrioid and ahead of CaptainTwig at the moment. I'm not sure what Jake has been up to, but farming like a maniac, I suppose, and that gives the Bolts a nice anchor point here on left.
It's the glory of being a mage, right? Like, you're going to be able to clear things a little bit quicker with the help of BaRRa. Like, if you double mage, theoretically means that you're going to be able to do a lot, but Jake's got to be careful.
It's a good Dharmic Pillars from Genetics. Actually, body block Jake for a moment, who's now going to dash away. Makes his way to BaRRaCCuDDa and out nice and safely. So, some pressure from the Kings starting to build. CaptainTwig had eyes for the duo lane. Then a Dharmic Pillar sent out. Does delay retreat, but doesn't end up setting up any kills for the Camelot Kings.
I think they, play it really well. You end up losing a little bit. Actually, yeah, the Obelisk, they get the entire charge that they need to for the Kings. So they get a Trebuchet, which is going to be helpful for them. But the thing is, in my mind, is a lot of the problem that the Kings are going to be facing is not necessarily anything that they can do much about. It's LASBRA has a much earlier scaling god than what you're going to see out of Twig. Same thing for Vin, for BaRRa. And for Jake, right? They're going to be able to do a lot more. Jake, as a mage, is going to be able to clear a lot more. To the point where I'm wondering if he's too squishy. You had mentioned the Chronos Pendant. I wonder if he's too squishy to pick it up, because he's been doing it a lot on Guardians. And it might not work well on the Nox, because you just die too fast.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe Spirit Robe, something like that, would have opened that up. We'll see. Jake always keeps us on our toes.
Yeah.
There's nothing.
No matter what his build was the last time he played Nox, this could very much be different.
That could look entirely different. Oh my goodness.
God.
CaptainTwig takes the stinger from Ven and has to use Destruction to get out. Jake just dancing inside the Dharmic Pillars, avoiding the Firebolts as best as he can, as BigManTingz will disengage his support. How about that for some burst damage, though? Ven sends the Stinger out and forces the immediate ultimate from Twig.
And good news for the Kings, though, Vin didn't pick the Stinger up, so it's not like that's going to be able to happen again in 10 seconds.
10
It
seconds,
is going to take a little bit longer for that to come through. You get his beads, you don't really burn any of your relics, so while your ults are down, and maybe that is going to be conscious and sitting on their minds, Dharmic Pillars has a really low cooldown, so it's going to be back sooner rather than later. And the biggest one you're missing is that destruction. You had highlighted it. It hurts as a Kali to have to use it that way, but I don't think you're going to be complaining too much. AMC, not crazy mobile, hits pretty hard, but you've got a good stun, good people behind you. I think this is an opportunity. If Vin, takes one step out of line, if he goes a little too deep in lane, I think there's a spot for Twig to potentially find a pretty clean gank against the AMC.
Yep. And that's what Kali affords you, able around this point in the game to really start to hit the mark. Tier 2 Odie bow.
Yeah.
So you're going to be getting the passive. Good attack speed online, good clear with the Golden Blade. And should hopefully be some good damage. How about LASBRA? He's gone immediately into the kin size. Now, when we've seen Osiris's build kin size, it feels like it's been last item. You get the rest of the build going, some hybrid tankiness, kin size at the end as the Bolts get the Pyromancer, but it is second item for LASBRA. And so, I suppose variety, genetics, anyone who might be building some health passively in their build, a bit more susceptible to LASBRA and Osiris damage in the first 15 or so minutes of this game.
Especially, you have to think, we were talking a lot about Warlock staff earlier, but things like that, where anything that gives health is going to be a little nicer for LASBRA. He's going to hit hard. The question I have for him, again, right now, I think hits pretty hard in comparison, but is this going to match up? It feels like auto-attacky, going one-on-one with a Kali might not still be the best bet. Late game Kali, once the chin size is finished there for Twig, plus ult, usually starts to skew one way more than the other. I think there's still a lot of capabilities there for LASBRA to try and win that trade, but it does feel very much like it's not just the jungle matchup in mind, right? It is the ganks, it is the opportunities that he's going to be able to afford, and a lot of it will be right here. I think we're going to see a surprising amount of damage from him.
Yeah, you think? Genetics uses beads, dashes away, then would love to get the Stinger back, but far too risky to step forward and pick that up. And another Stinger out, another near kill for the Olympus Bolts, who have extended their lead to about 2,500 up to this point. A couple of kills, 3,500 experience as well. And so really this Camelot Kings squad that we talk so much about being macro near perfect and objective near perfect, being a bit out-farmed in the early parts of this game. Those first round of objectives ultimately make a really big difference, something you expect the Camelot Kings to at least be aware of, on point of, if the Bolts are able to pull them. Genetics drops a ward, gets his dash canceled out, and then rooted in place. Uses Dharmic Pillars to slow down LASBRA. That's a good knock-up from Netrioid, but Lord of the Afterlife to reinitiate. Sprint ends up getting popped, and awesome. Jake and Haddix both running forward. Genetics survives in the back of the purple buff pit, but not for long, as Haddix is rotated through. Use the Cthulhu ultimate to usher his teammates away from this fight, and the Bolts gather around their jungler and find themselves another kill and maybe a gold fury.
That's such a big opening, right? You force Netrioid back so they're not around to spot this out. I think even if the Kings know about this, and they probably do, there's not much you can do. You just used a lot of your ults to try and survive, to make sure that you didn't end up trading more than just genetics there. But you get a kill, you get a gold fury. You were highlighting it. This is a good start for the Bolts. Great amount of gold lead. Barrett didn't even have to use his ult. Vin had just got his Stinger back, just used it again as well. So a lot of those power punches, I think, that they have in their team fight were still available around the Gold Fury. And I think as long as BaRRA has his ult, you gotta be careful when and where you engage for the Kings.
Jake has been obnoxious, and the Kings may make him pay for his attitude up to this point, but Jake again able to dance inside of the Dharmic Pillars. Fire Giant getting some action in the first 15 minutes. But more than anything, just some poke damage. The Bolts will be able to get out. Jake is playing this Nox very effectively right now. Only 1 of 3 affected kills, but what we've seen, just the disruption, the slight annoyance that's been living in the Camelot King side of the map, and Genetics has dropped Dharmic Pillars on Jake a few times. Jake is able to dash out into a teammate. It's just been annoying, and it's been effective for the Bolts up to this point.
It's like it's the younger sibling style of play, right? Like he's not necessarily getting anything crazy done,
Right.
but he's slowing the Kings down and annoying them, pestering them, right? Poking them, prodding them every single chance they get. And I love the fact that he's doing it that way because, you know, while he was up 2 levels earlier, now it's only a single level, maybe Genetics can catch up in farm, maybe even surpass him in farm at the rate this is going. Chronos Pendant now online, so Genetics is going to be able to impact these plays a lot more in terms of like ults and cooldown just in general. But when I look at Jake, you know, a lot of what Nox is trying to do in any of these fights, throw down the silence. Ideally, at the beginning, if it's a huge team fight, hit as many people with your ult as possible so they deal less damage, and then just play lockdown. I mean, a lot of it is just be annoying. Like, what he's been doing is what he's going to continue to do. And so I'd say look at this, especially with the Lono's Mask coming up. Like, Jake should get tanky and should be able to find a lot of
There's
trades.
the kill. Finally for Ven, 1 drops. I mean, so many stingers and honey and bees have been used in mid with near kill pickups. And Ven able to get the tick damage onto Genetics. So the mid for the Olympus Bolts adding a kill for the first time after an assist earlier on. And a full tier 1 tower. This thing was near full HP. The Bolts are just playing such a clean brand of Smite right now. Now look, if this is the Renegades of like a few years ago, you're like waiting on the shoe to drop, right? You're like, when are the Bolts gonna
shoot themselves in the foot?
Right, overextend, you know, take a bad fight, do something dumb. But really, like, this team experiment, if you rewind a few years ago, and the Renegade squad, I don't want to call this game over. I don't want to tout them too much before they're even securing the game here in Game 1. My point is, it feels like they have bought our respect to the point where now it feels like a game where the Kings have to come back and not a game where the Kings can just wait on the Bolts to mess up.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. Phase 2, because it was Phase 2 last year, Phase 2 this year. The Bolts just, for some reason, middle of the year is their stride. Maybe not exactly where they want it, but it is a really good...
So drink it in if you're a Bolts fan, because if it's like last year...
It'll start to taper out when it gets important, unfortunately. Right? No, it's just been fun to watch them because of the fact that, much like you said, right? You get to watch these small improvements every week to week. You know, you go back, you mentioned the Renegade squad when they played with it. A lot of the problem that I remember talking about is just specifically like consistency. Like, damn guys, you're really good.
Yeah, come on.
Just do it more often, please.
Right.
And last year we got to see that, right? We got to see it come up more often. Unfortunately for them, a lot of the other teams were matching that. And so really what we got, at least as viewers, was just a ton of great games to watch because everybody had stepped it up. And that's what this matchup is to me. And I still think, you know, much like you had said, this is one where we have to watch and keep our eye out, not just for tendencies like of old, where it is like maybe a little bit of an overextension, maybe you choose a fight you shouldn't have, things like that, but more so because this is going to be a rough draft. Even with this amount of a lead up against this Kings comp, it's going to be difficult to just take the game, right? You need a little bit more. 4,000 gold's a lot 20 minutes in, but you really need to be able to hold your own.
Right, and it's a fight like this, especially their tier 1 down, where someone like Awesome Jake may stick around a bit too long, give a kill over to the Camelot Kings, give an advantage to the Chaos side, but Jake will dash to Haddix and escape for now, but surely there's chase down. That's so annoying. Finally, Jake dies, and the Kings find first blood for their own team here in game number 1. Not much of an answer from the Bolts. That was a long chase down. And CaptainTwig, with his own pair of kin size online, trying to deal a little bit of extra damage. And this is a great rally from the Camelot Kings. You get a pick on a Jake finally to push down some objectives.
I mean, Jake's gone. Haddix had to back. If they had been able to push down that tower either a little quicker or had abandoned the tower a little faster, because Ven had to back as well, that many TKOs, you might have been able to force a Fire Giant fight. An uncomfortable one, I think, for both squads. But it still could have been a potential play. Try to force like LASBRA to step a little forward, drop the FG, go for the kill, and find a second pick. Other than that, you get 3 TKOs, 1 actual KO, and that tower, while it still exists, it is virtually nothing. I mean, they should be able to walk in at any point in time and knock that down. And so I'm going to consider the right side Phoenix almost exposed and treat it as I mean, if you win the game, you can just walk over to that one.
Right? Yeah, it does feel that way. Oni Fury given to the Olympus Bolts. Netrioid was close. try to send some damage that way. I think worth talking about Netrioid's build a bit. I noticed early when we were talking about LASBRA getting Kinsai's second item overall, I noticed that Netrioid had done the same thing but one item sooner, gotten Kinsai's first into the Aussie. It's sort of that tank shred style of build that was popular for a little while, maybe even a couple seasons ago, into Silver Branch on top of that. So attack speed, the name of the game here for Netrioid. I mean, perfect for dealing with Haddix, you gotta feel like limiting the Cthulhu, limiting some of the tankier targets.
Yeah, and it's the easiest one to, well, quote unquote, easiest one. That's the easiest target to choose to burn down because he's so massive. And it is an easy decision to make because, yes, he's the one that, you know, we talked about when Cthulhu came out. That was just the thing. How do you kill him? Do you have something like a Nemesis to help burn through procs? That was kind of the go-to whenever that happened. I think Kali's a really good example. If you choose, for whatever reason, if you choose, maybe just for the extra damage, the Cthulhu as your mark, then you're going to be able to chase them down pretty easily. That plus the chin size, as you mentioned, for Netrioid. And just good damage, I think, with some of the pin that's online for Tings, should open up that conversation. But Haddix has been a little bit of a monster up to this point. And outside of that last moment where he got TKO'd, he's been roughly impossible to kill.
Uh-oh, Genetics is in some trouble. Haddix should be able to finish off the kill, and he does. And now I think that's got to be just retreat for the Camelot Kings. So exactly what happened to the Bolts just a few moments ago happens to the Kings. Support gets picked, and a good push opportunity on the right side of the map. LASBRA, though, going toe-to-toe with Twig, and Twig jumps away, realizing that the Bolts maybe could reinitiate on that fight and help out LASBRA a bit quicker. And so we have traded towers for towers and supports for supports on the right side.
I'm impressed, though. The amount of damage Twig was able to go deal through the Tether, like Tether giving LASBRA a little more tankiness to try and find that fight, I think is good for Twig, showcasing what it can be. Unfortunately, if that Tether goes through and that stun happens, you're just going to die, right? So you have to leap away. Then the Bolts have backup as well. LASBRA's coming in. So I think it is a good call for them to retreat the way they do and keep themselves, again, alive for the next fight more than anything. Mantle of Discord just got picked up by LASBRA as well, so I expect to see a lot more in the face, deal the damage with the Toxic Blade. I mean, it is feeling almost exclusively like someone who is trying to kill Twig, kill Netrioid. It is, can I chase down the Kali? If I die or the Kali kills their target, they're going to get less healing from their passive. Or if I'm up against Netrioid and that pesky, really good Aussie passive procs, they're not going to get anywhere near as much healing back. So it gives the opportunity to help and continue those fights to be successful for the Bolts, as long as they can maintain that amount of presence.
I'm just surprised. I keep looking at Netrioid's build. I mean, I'm just surprised we've moved away from crit on Jing Wei. I thought those two things are hand in hand and something that is gospel. You just don't move away from it. But now dominance after the Silver Branch. So, I mean, you're gonna have Shred, the percent pen on autos with dominance. All that feels great for Netrioid. Into the tanky targets. Suppose you're hoping that Twig and Tings can have some burst damage. I mean, don't get me wrong, later in the game, Netrioid's gonna burn down Ven and BaRRaCCuDDa just fine as well, but you know, when you're playing at the SPL level, the small damage differences, things like that, against squishy targets, tanky targets, all that makes a difference. We haven't looked at Bear's build much. Couple of rings into Typhons, into the Rod of Tahuti. And so Olorun and Freya Gore, these magical ADCs, the conversation has been in the first few levels no longer maybe feel as weak. Still not the strongest, right, as any hunter isn't, but later in the game still scale up amazingly, and it feels like BaRRaCCuDDa really has reached that point.
Yeah, I mean, right now, should hit pretty hard. Most of the time we get to talk about Olorun, it's not usually the damage, and I think at this point, it'll be the damage, right? You know, the magical crit, unaffected by things like Spectral Armor, so that's going to feel pretty nice just in his passive. And then on top of that, you've got a great ultimate, which is the thing that we always hone in on with an Olorun. And decent damage on top of it, good lifesteal. I think that we're going to see a very well-surviving BaRRaCCuDDa, depending on who's the one hitting him, right? I think, you know, Ganesha gets back there, Variety gets back there, maybe not too worried. If the ult goes down, though, that shell and those beads are going to be the most important thing in Barra's life. Like, maintaining those and making sure that he's able to, you know, get out of a stun from a Kali, pop the shell before the autos start to do too much, keep himself alive.
Out of nowhere, the Fire Giant started by the Olympus Bolts, and they're going to finish it. Doing it so quickly, an FG to the Bolts. And nothing. That is the least dramatic 25-minute Fire Giant in a somewhat close game that I've ever seen. And it's no longer really somewhat close score. This is a hefty lead for the Olympus Bolts. 7,500 over the last few minutes, 6,000 experience. That's interesting. I don't know if that's one where the Kings just don't realize it's happening, or they do, but maybe didn't realize how fast the Bolts would do it. But that's simple. As soon as we noticed it happened, it was gone. And now the Bolts, all 5 with Fire Giant in the first 25 minutes of this game, and still a few towers to burn.
Yeah, I mean, 3 towers up for them to knock down, which on its own is going to be a ton of gold, but with the Fire Giant buff as well.
That caught me by surprise.
I think that it's just a good call, right? They go in. What are they going to do? Like, if they walk in, we have Sanctified Fields, we kill them. If they don't walk in, we still drop Sanctified Fields, and we kill AFG. Either way, you get a win-win. You've got 3 minutes of a power play. Kings are all right-hand side of the map right now, so this should be a free couple of towers for the Bolts. It is going to be strictly a Phoenix defense.
Really hope that Genetics is able to get these Dharmic Pillars off. Just now able to buy Pridwin. For a while was sitting on the tier 1 Pridwin item. Upgraded the Ankh, so that feels good, but took a minute. Felt like a very squishy Ganesh there for a while, where Jake's been able to upgrade both relics and get Lono's mask. This Nox clearly just has a lot more gold than the Ganesh at its disposal. Great Dharmic Pillars from Ganesh. It's what you wanted to see. Genetics dashes forward, but a Sanctified Field from BaRRaCCuDDa forces the Camelot Kings back, and Venenu hits home with the stinger. And Variety falls. And the King Arthur no longer allowed to participate. LASBRA's got to leap away. Destruction used by CaptainTwig, and it'll whirl away. And the jump out, enough to secure Twig's safety.
I mean, that's several ults, though, that are used from the Kings just to stay alive in that. It's a game-ending play for the Bolts that gets sabotaged by the ults on the side of the Kings.
Right.
I mean, well played for them to keep going, but better from the Bolts. I mean, just clean. BaRRA takes a lot of damage up front, has to burn the beads in the ult, but ultimately is able to keep himself going, keeps the shell for both him and Ven.
And Ven picks up his stinger. That's important here. Has his ultimate back. Nobody else outside of Genetics. Of course, the Ganesh, with that level of CDR, is going to get the Dharmic Pillars back. And again, it's good. Shreds down protection, some bit of damage onto a few members of the Bolts. But how fast that Phoenix just burned. It's still 5 seconds on Variety. Gore, this is maybe one of the cleanest games of Smite I've seen this year.
Yeah.
Where you look at min-maxing every single moment. The stumble is giving up a pick and then a tier 1 and tier 2 on the right side of the map to the Kings a few moments ago. But every objective, a quick Fire Giant call, and a near perfect Phoenix Siege in left and mid. Haddix teleports back mid. You get that, Phoenix. This game 1 from the Bolts is maybe one of the best games of Smite I've seen this year in season 9.
That honestly might be one of the best games I've seen in the last 2 years. Like, it's just very clean. Everything you highlighted, it fits perfectly. I think that itemization-wise, they've been doing a great job of dealing with the Kings, and specifically what the Kings draft is going to be capable of. The one that caught my eye, we don't get to see this often. BaRRaCCuDDa, like, on its own, has not been a very, like, huge item pickup. I think so far this year is usually it's thrown maybe at the end of the build, sometimes a little bit extra power, depending on the god. But now we not only get to see it, we get to see a glyph that we normally don't even see. I think most of the time BaRRaCCuDDa gets kind of thrown off to the wayside and just left where it is, no upgrades. BaRRA has opted in for the glyph, and it is the one that is attack speed specifically. So every magical power is going to have 2% attack speed. I mean, you're talking about a guy alongside Ven that is going to shred objectives, shred any of these neutral priorities in the middle of the map.
Magical power. Hit it back, Doug. Give me a quick peek.
I didn't even see.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, baby. There it is.
The nice 420 magical power for BaRRA. Quick, Gore, what's that divided by 40?
Divided by 40?
Is that 8?
No. Oh my God, divided by 40? 420 divided by 40 is a little over 10.
Yeah, wait. What's 8 times 4?
It's going to be like, it's less than 11, but more than 10. 8
times 4 is 32, not 42.
Yeah.
It's just so bad by me.
44. Okay.
My goodness.
You lost me. You looked at me, and I'm like, oh, quick maths. Okay, let's see.
Like, surely it's 8, and then I was just off by
It's like 10 and a half, actually, I think exactly.
He's getting a lot of extra attack speed is the point here. He's got really, really high damaging items and a real solid amount of magical power. So that extra attack speed might help in a fight in mid. As Variety and Twig are about to get collapsed upon, Destruction is available. Yes! Oh my goodness, Destruction! Time's out and Twig will leave empty-handed. BaRRaCCuDDa knocks down one. And perfect timing, Gore. What just respawned the enhanced fire giant, and Twig is gone for 50.
Yeah, and plus you've got fire minions. They're at the tier 1 line over on left. Fire minions that are getting to the tier 2 line in mid. This is a must fight for the Kings because otherwise you will just lose the game, but it's so difficult to go in. Luckily, LASBRA, Ven, their health bars are a little low. This is a good opportunity to push forward.
And the Bolts are missing some key team fight ultimates. You don't have Descent into Madness. You don't have Sanctified Field. Only Stinger really available
Bear's missing
that
relics.
you're looking for. So maybe this is the only opportunity for the Camelot Kings, and maybe why we see the Bolts slow playing it just a bit. Variety locked in place. And it'll happen again and again and again. Dharmic Pillars thrown out by Genetics. That's Trap BaRRaCCuDDa and Ven in with the Fire Giant, actually taking some chunk damage on the back line of this fight. And Awesome Jake is as well. And so the Kings have at least done their job. The 4 remaining members of the Kings have at least stopped the Bolts from getting the enhanced Fire Giant for free. Tier 1, or rather left side Phoenix just respawned, gets taken down by the Fire Minions. Really just best case scenario for the Bolts, delaying backs, keeping the left side Phoenix dead and respawning for the next few minutes.
It feels like it's a lose-lose scenario there for the Kings, right? Your best chance at that fight is for it to just happen, and the best thing that could have happened for you is if you get a kill. But it's unfortunate because you have a numbers disadvantage. Even with relics down, even with ults down, the Bolts just have a very good grouping, good, like lifesteal there for BaRRA that's going to keep him alive. Ven just has good positioning. Even the Dharmic Pillars look beautiful and help get some of the damage out there, but the capability to lock down the kill just wasn't there. But you win, quote-unquote, win that fight because they don't get the EFG, and you lose your Phoenix anyway, right? And the mid is barely respawned.
Twig, not here yet, was dealing with some minions in mid, the last wave of fire minions, and so mid lane Phoenix should be okay. Outside of somebody from either team going over to mid to pressure those waves, which LASBRA is doing now. It would have been an even meeting in the mid. Now this is where, if you are Jake, if you are Haddix, you can't get caught out. Your team has such a massive advantage, but the death timers are so long in a game like this, and the builds have scaled up nicely for the Camelot Kings. Haddix has got to use the ultimate, moves through the Dharmic Pillars. Where is LASBRA? Fighting out with CaptainTwig on left. A Sanctified Field from BaRRaCCuDDa. Pushes back the Camelot Kings. A simple fight, you would think, for LASBRA. Destruction forced by CaptainTwig. Damage out from Netrioid. The Bolts come up empty-handed, but do they really? Is Netrioid exploded by Ven?
And look, they have enough damage. LASBRA's a little low, Jake's a little low, but with Haddix here, and look at BaRRA and Ven's health bars, look at their relics, they are more than happy to take the Sanctified Fields not up, but it doesn't even matter.
My goodness, this may just be the fight. 2 down for the Camelot Kings. The Olympus Bolts, they retain all 5. They will get Enhanced Fire Giant. And Gore, maybe you're worried. Yeah, our health bar's a bit low for Haddix, a bit low for Awesome Jake. Hey, Haddix can, and he can go back, reset, teleport back in with the upgraded teleport. And I'm glad Doug highlights the Stinger there, Gore, because that has just done work for the Olympus Bolts this game. Top damage in the game is Ven, for good reason. Stinger's been connecting, burst damage has been connecting, and the Olympus Bolts have played around that shred so well. Right side Phoenix gone, mid lane Phoenix up next.
I mean, this should be an easy knockdown for him. Honestly, you've got the numbers advantage for 20 seconds. Just go in.
Yeah, we're just gonna go to the Titan, and the Titan won't last long. Olympus Bolts rout the Camelot Kings in game number 1.
It was just beautiful Smite. Like, that is exactly what you want to see from a team. I mean, the Bolts played that so cleanly. Even in the moments where it looked like the Kings were able to turn something back, it all started to crumble underneath them. And I was saying that early on, that it's like, okay, you have to have enough of a lead. You have to be able to play clean, perfect Smite, because otherwise that draft scales really well into the late game. Their power curve is going to be about 20 minutes in. You've got to be careful when you go into those fights. Well, when you go into those fights, you got a, 8,000 gold lead. You've been getting every objective up to that point. And every fight, you've got better team fight ultimates, everything that you would have needed. It feels like the Bolts heard it. They said, okay, cool, then we'll just play perfect Smite and continue to do so.
Camelot Kings had the one moment. It's the one pick onto Jake. You get a couple towers in the solo lane side of the map, and that's it for the Camelot Kings
forgot
this
about
game.
it, if I'm honest with you.
You're welcome for the reminder, Gore, because that's all the Kings got going here on game 1. Clean Smite for the Bolts. Bolts fans and the players themselves very happy after game 1, but Kings fans, have no worry. We've got a game number 2 coming up next.
Hey, wait, what did it win?
You win the respect.
You're telling me an alien wore this?
Perfect. Okay.
Okay, that was a good cut.
Messaging him to mute.
The best graphics you really need, Ultra, of course, and I can probably watch a stream on the side.
Content's gonna look good.
Pretty good, pretty good.
You don't know what's coming down. I got you hypnotized. Take a real close look now. I'm going to show you how. I'm about to get down. So keep it up right now. So keep it up. So keep it up with me. I need to move. I need to feel the beat. Don't be a fool. You wanna hang with me. Life isn't easy. You gotta roll the dice. You wanna change. Join the paradise. So bring it on if you wanna hang with me. Right? You know I know we kick it like no one else. We kick it like no one else. Listen out, there ain't nothing like this. You know I know we kick it like no one else. We kick it like no one else. Listen out, there ain't nothing like this. Take a real close look now. Baby, I'm versatile. Watch me when I come down. I make it worth a while. Take a real close look now. I'm gonna show you how. I'm about to get down. So keep it up right now. So keep it up. So keep it up with me. I need to move. I need to feel the beat. Don't be a fool. You wanna hang with me. Life isn't easy. You gotta roll the dice. You wanna change. Join the paradise. So bring it on if you wanna hang with me. You know I know we kick it like no one else. We kick it like no one else. Listen now, there ain't nothing like this. You know I know we kick it like no one else. We kick it like no one else. Listen now, there ain't nothing like this. You know I know we kick it like no one else. We kick it like no one else. Listen now, there ain't nothing like this. You know I know we kick it like no one else. We kick it like no one else. Listen now, there ain't nothing like this. Ooh, I know, you know, we kick it like no one else. Do 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 do, yeah. Do 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 do. One step forward, two steps backwards, yeah. Immature lover who don't use big words, yeah. I don't need convincing at all because I know what I want. Baby, can't you figure it out? What's going on in your heart? What's it gonna take for you to love? Take for you to love me? What's it gonna take for you to show? Take for you to show feels, yeah. I've been trying to take it slow, but my patience low. Think it's time you let me know. What's it gonna take for you to love? Take for you to love me? Yeah. Summer's over, still getting nowhere, yeah. If winter blows here, baby, I fear we gon' disappear. Do you even want me? Do you even worry that I'm gonna love somebody else? Do you think about me when you're feeling lonely by yourself? What's it gonna take for you to love?
Olympus Bolts with a very clean game number 1 win over the Camelot Kings to start out this set. And all of our players, our production, and even us here on the desk are powered by Alienware, sponsor in Season 9 of the SPL. Make sure you go to SMITEGame.com/Alienware. Use code AWSMITE09 to see all the great offers that Alienware has for you, the fans at home. And follow Alienware on their social media platforms on Twitter and Instagram at Alienware. Go to AlienwareArena.com to see all the cool stuff that they have, not just inside the machines, but that they can offer to you, the fans, out there. So thank you so much to Alienware for coming back to Season 9 of the SPL. J-Mac and Mifflin back on the desk here in game number 2 after a clinical performance really out of the Bolts in game number 1. When we talk a lot about the macro play of the Kings, they've talked about how, falling down, 2,000-3,000 early, not a complete stranger to them, but falling down 12,000-13,000, that's something that the Kings aren't quite used to. And the Olympus Bolts, I think only with a single death throughout the entirety of that game, I think clean might be an understatement for their play that time.
Yeah, these are always the hardest games to break down, right? When it is almost entirely one-sided throughout the entire duration of a match, you can only really say, well, this went well for the Bolts, and then this went well for the Bolts, and then that went well for the Bolts, and, that's boring air. But unfortunately, I just got a report on it. I'm not writing the story. I'm simply telling you what happened. And the Olympus Bolts simply won out. It is what we had, I suppose, hypothesized during the picks and bans, whichever one of these two teams were able to establish an early lead would likely hold on to it just by nature of their compositions. And the Olympus Bolts established an early lead, ran down every single objective, and the Camelot Kings made some decisions which were, I don't want to walk into a sanctified field. That Cthulhu's already kaiju tier, like he's 40 feet tall. I'm not walking into that. And when you choose to not walk into literally everything, that means the Bolts are going to get literally everything. And that's exactly what happened.
And a lot of this setup, thanks to really coming back from Jake, when we talked about how proficient he is on this Nox, but it was essentially whoever he targeted out was just dead. Venenu on this Muzen Cobb, whoever was rooted by Nox was eating a stinger. Whoever gets knocked up by this Cthulhu or trying to charge an airstrike is just getting hit by the stinger and dying immediately afterward. The damage output that this team was able to put out off the tail end of one singular CC was astronomical, and because of that, the Kings just had no way of fighting back into the team fight prowess of the Bolts.
Yeah, just clean play across the board. Only one death, 0-1-7 for Jake, I believe participating in 7 of the 8 total kills, so I'm not going to complain so much. Maybe the only black mark on the Olympus Bolts history there, but he's a support. I'm all right with him dying. He could have died like 5 times. I wouldn't have cared.
No. 26,000 player damage out of Venenu. A lot of damage mitigated out of Haddix, 55k up in that Cthulhu, being able to continue to be that frontline presence. Those sanctified fields. I go back to the left side Phoenix Siege that the Olympus Bolts had, and they started losing the fight just a little bit at the left side Phoenix. Man, Ganesha Dharmic Pillars comes out, tries to do some of those prots, and they do a lot of damage back. And then I look over at all the diamonds on the left side, and the Bolts had every single one of them. Stinger was still up, Jake's ults was still up, Sanctified Field, and Descent of Madness. They took the Phoenix and then decided, okay, maybe now we should use our ultimates and actually do something. And they do. They clean up left Phoenix, they take mid, and then they fall back and do it all over again once they get another Fire Giant. Olympus Bolts just never really under threat at all that game.
Yeah, so I wonder how the Camelot Kings are going to change up in P's and B's. Are they going to try and put a little bit more emphasis on the early portions of their draft? You can get CaptainTwig back on the Osiris, the Erlong Shens. That could help you out a fair bit, because the scaling of that Olympus Bolts draft really was the cinch pin. That was exactly what they were looking for the entire time. So once they got to the late game with their 10,000 gold lead, it was pretty clear the outcome from there. So could be looking at Twig to make adjustments out of the jungle. The Kali didn't really have the best time getting involved in those team fights. Or the Camelot Kings could say, hey, normally we're the ones that just farm really well. Normally we're the ones who want the game to go to 30 minutes. So let's double down and draft a very late game composition and just try and weather the storm throughout the early.
And that is one of the things that the Camelot Kings talked about going against the Bolts, is that the Bolts do have a very strong early game. LASBRA is known to be able to get these level 2 and 3 ganks off, whether it be in the mid, whether he goes to solo or the dual lane. LASBRA just so efficient at being able to make his mark on the map. We'll jump into the picks and bans for game number 2 and see what changes the Kings do make. The Olympus Bolts in their banning phase last time around focused a lot on supports and guardians in general. As a Artio, Khepri, and a Yemoja that they banned. Camelot Kings were a little bit more scattered on where their bans were, but now that they're in the first pick slot, there's a lot of things that the Camelot Kings can go for.
They could, You're at least forcing the Bolts to ban out like the prime suspects, right? Like if you're worried about the Camelot Kings getting Yemoja, the Bolts have to ban it. The Chernobog, which has been first pick more often than not, the Bolts have to ban it this time around. So I'm liking what we're seeing from the Kings, and this is generally the answer in the SPL. If you're in first pick position, you have carte blanche. Let's go ahead and then toss out some targeted bans.
Well, the Yemoja does get left open, and that is something that Genetics specifically has been doing very well with for the Camelot Kings between him and Jake, both of them two of the top players in the league on this pick. The Yemoja gets left open because it was a dodgy Xingqian and Cthulhu ban out of the Kings. The Bolts took away the Osiris, Khepri, and Chernobog. But now it's going to bring open Sobek for the Bolts, and we've been seeing a bit of a rise of Sobek as of recent Mifflin.
Sobek is just so annoying, man. You can toss him over in the support role, and he puts a lot of pressure on lacking mobility hunters, or you can have him go over into the solo lane and just hold his own. He's not going to win very many matchups. He might get you a couple Totem-a-Coups depending on exactly who he's lined up against. Conduit Gem helps out a fair bit throughout that early. But what Sobek solo brings is another primary initiator in the late game team fight, and one that is incredibly hard to shut down. Also a laner that is just really the opposite of fun for junglers to rotate over and try and gank. The pluck, the CC immunity of lurking in the waters, the tail whip, the self-sustain, all makes it so difficult to shut him down. So Sobek, I think, makes sense that he's had a resurgence recently. It's really just that flex potential that bumps him a couple of tiers. If you can only take him to support, not feeling so great, but Conduit Gem means that he can go back to solo.
And speaking of solo lane and Conduit Gem, another one of the abuses of that item, and one of the gods that's been coming back up into the ranks has been Artio, and that gets locked in for the Camelot Kings. And then this Chiron pick, this is something that, and not necessarily Netrioid exclusively, but Netrioid primarily has been going back to more often than not for the Camelot Kings. It's been showing a lot of success, the damage output that this god is able to do. While it's not a more traditional style of hunter that we're used to seeing, we have been kind of seeing this trend rising back up of these more ability styles. I mean, you think Ul, AMC, and Chiron and Neath kind of thrown right into that mix.
High DPS, good chase down potential, synergizes well with the Yemoja and the Artio, both gods that can really get into that back line, just need a little bit of help closing gap. Chiron with Centaurus is your gap close. The applies a slow with Masterful Shot, and from there, Artio and Yemoja should be able to line up the ultimates, the stuns, the cripple fields, everything that you need. So I think Chiron has got his home in the meta. Long-range artillery damage, very good into things like Freya as well. How often do we see a Freya do a whole lot of damage with her first two abilities and then say, all right, well, they're on cooldown, I'm going to go up to Valkyrie's Discretion and disengage. Doesn't exactly work that way if Chiron's staring you down with the ultimate. It can just connect from max distance.
Well, as we jump into the second wave of bans, mostly targets in the jungle, Nemesis and Erlong Shen out of the Olympus Bolts, Fenrir so far from the Camelot Kings. That means we're going to be diving a little bit deeper down, and it does seem that with some of the nerfs that have come to Mercury with this bonus patch, it seems that junglers are starting to shy away from him a little bit more. We're not seeing that first pick, first ban priority necessarily anymore on that god. And the Camelot Kings, with their final ban, instead of a jungle, will take away Awesome Jake's Nox, which has been successful for the Olympus Bolts. But, I mean, am I right to just assume that it feels like Mercury's just kind of fallen out of favor for a lot of teams?
Yeah, Mercury is similar to Erlong Shen pre-rework in that it's feast or famine for the most part. You're going to spend a whole lot of the time in the early game just farming up in your own jungle. You're not exactly the best at ganking these lanes, except for duo. Mercury probably the very best at ganking the duos. You can just walk down the lane itself and line up those sonic booms. But recently, we've been seeing these junglers fill in more the facilitator role. You want things that can start the initiation, start the fights off, stick into that back line, be a disruption factor. And Mercury disrupts with damage, but gets taken out pretty quickly himself. So no surprise to me that he's fallen at least a little bit out of favor. Maybe completely due to the fact Hazer tweeted out that Mercury's just bad and SPL teams are dumb. And ever since then, we haven't seen it anymore. So maybe this is Hazer's influence.
Maybe so. I mean, I have noticed a lot less Mercury's ever since that tweet came through, but we've been seeing a lot more Raven as of recent with that mitigation build. The Olympus Bolts will go back to it. Now, if I recall correctly, the last time that the Bolts used this Raven over in the solo lane, it got completely ignored by the Leviathans. They just basically left Haddix on his own island, and this is going even beyond the solo lane. They literally just let Haddix play the game whatever he wanted to do and did everything else around
Did he end
them.
0-0-0?
I believe that was a 0-0-0 or a 0-0-1 game out of him. And that was like a 30-plus minute game. Haddix just didn't get to play the game of Smite with the rest of the team.
brave of Haddix to go back towards that pick, if that is the selection. Still some flex potential. Sobek, of course, could be in the solo lane, but it doesn't exactly fit Haddix's playstyle. He strikes me as one that just really wants to get involved early on, wants to have that damage output, wants to be a threat in of his own right. So I think the Ravana, good call by you, probably is headed over towards the solo lane. But with that said, Haddix is the only guy building Death Toll Ravana. It's a completely different look. It's not the warding sigil. He's not running down that mitigation tree. Does eventually start looking at that Lono's mask, but his survivability, Haddix's rather, comes from the Death's Embrace, that survivability of the HP returned on every single one of those auto attacks in conjunction with the HP shield that you get from auto attacking thanks to Ravana's passive is a bit annoying, but maybe slightly less damage overall than what we've seen from SOT's build.
We'll see now. Gilgamesh and Poseidon locked in by the Camelot Kings. So something for CaptainTwig, instead of being the chainsaw to try and shred through at the late stages, be more of that facilitator style early game with the use of all the CC, the drop kick, the slow, Winds of Shamash, so many tools available to Gilgamesh to be played. And then the Poseidon, that's something that's worked out very well for BigManTingz. Has had quite a few games on it as of recent, has had quite the performance on it as well, so much that he's been able to make himself nearly a candidate for even one of those MVPs, those most valuable primary in our weeks. A 5-1-6, 5-0-6, and a 4-1-3 the last 3 times that this guy's played this god.
And as, I mean, the stats speak for themselves. I can't argue against it, but I will say the weakness of BigManTingz on Poseidon is that he generally takes a much slower approach to the early game. He's really waiting to get that Bumbuzz available. He's mostly playing just to farm up the map really well. That additional movement speed that he gets from the title meter utilized to clear out the jungle for the most part. So at times this could make it difficult for CaptainTwig to farm up, but assuming Twig is playing this Gilgamesh, he's there to be a facilitator regardless. So maybe giving up some of his farm to BigManTingz is just the way of the road for him.
Bit of an interesting switch up here. Ravana, who up until just recently had been kind of seen more as a jungle-style pick, will actually be going into the jungle. Sobek and Cerberus will be the 2 frontliners to the Olympus Bolts now with that as a final selection. So now that we've seen, what the damage mitigation build of the solo lane is for Ravana, Miff, talk to me a little bit about kind of the jungle pathing for the Ravana now.
Well, it's been a while since we've seen him in the jungle, but I gotta assume that with the scaling changes, things like Transcendence are starting to look a lot better on him. You want to get involved early. The entirety of the mace tree is utilized very, very well by Ravana. A lot of his survivability coming from the kit means that you can itemize a little bit more so towards damage if you are playing him in the jungle. So expect Heartseekers. Wouldn't be surprised if Aerondites are looked at. Massive pen options, things along those lines for this Ravana to act as a bridge into the late game, and then now that he has those scaling changes, his late game doesn't fall off nearly as hard. He really does deal very decent damage.
And now that we've actually seen the fact that, the Poseidon was locked in after the Ravana, maybe thinking that Ravana was going to be going over to the solo lane, now having that switch up in the jungle, I mean, how much does that change up that dynamic of the mid lane?
Well, in mid, you can get a little bit more active, right? Anytime your Ravana is playing with you, imagine playing with Ravana is similar in execution as playing with the Erlong Shens or playing with the Osirises. You just want to get active early on, put out that pressure, make sure you're getting dominance around those mid camps, the mid right side, left side, all the neutral farm, greater Scorpions as well. Ravana is good at that, and he's always been good at that. And he's also good at diving deep and getting out alive. Overhead kick, has survivability, the CC immunity from the ultimate. So yeah, I'm expecting some early aggression.
Yeah, I gotta imagine so. I mean, you're talking about all the counterplay that he does have over there. So mid definitely gonna be a big focus for this Ravana. Maybe jump himself over into the dual lane, try and get some action going over there, some decent targets, being able to maybe take down Netrioid. So the Olympus Bolts are gonna have a lot of work cut out for them to be able to make sure that they can hold themselves out. The Camelot Kings definitely got to have a step up in this game. In last game, fell behind very early. It was 2 kills in the early game and 2,000 gold, and then that continued to start spiraling out of control for the Camelot Kings. So where do they make their mark? Do they try and facilitate to have and make sure that their jungler, CaptainTwig, can find some success to get them going earlier on? Just to let you guys know, we do have a bit of a remake going on for these 2 teams, and that one we'll make sure that we can get you guys into the game as quick as we can. But for the CaptainTwig and going back on there, is CaptainTwig going to have to be the player who's able to get the ball rolling for the Camelot Kings?
I think so. I mean, Gilgamesh just having so much early pressure. You really want him getting involved. Dropkick being like essentially a 2-second stun at level 1 is really hard to contend with. Oh, yeah. Oh, wait, no. We're remaking because Gilgamesh
Correct. Yes.
is a banned character.
Yes, that's what
Do we know what Twig's playing?
We have been informed that Gilgamesh is currently competitive banned, so it's going to be a full remake of the picks and bans out here.
But
with
I did so
Gilgamesh
much
not
analysis
going.
work.
I know. We went so far in that one. I wonder if that even changes up, that final pick, at least for the Olympus Bolts, because now that
Maybe.
Gilgamesh isn't picked, maybe this Ravana can go over to the Soul Lane, so we're going to have to see exactly what those two teams go with now.
So what do I talk about, J-Mac? I'm lost.
Where do we go? What do we do from here?
I have no clue.
I mean, let's talk about at least the success that the Bolts had in game number 1, which was being able to get that macro play. Something the Kings were talking a lot about in the pregame interview was the Bolts are good at early game, man. The Bolts were good in the early game in game number 1. That's what led them to being able to move on. Camelot Kings typically a team that does kind of scale themselves towards late game, so more often than not, we imagine that the Kings do want to pick gods that are a little bit more late game centric. That's why we saw the Kali in game number 1. That's something that you want to wait until 25, 30 minutes before you can get online. So gotta imagine the Kings maybe kind of go with the idea that you had. Hunker down. If you know that the late game is where you're better at, maybe just draft a full late game composition.
But that's a double-edged sword, right? Because
True.
you lost out super early up against
True.
the Olympus Bolts. I mean, kill pressure, objective pressure, all favoring the Bolts in game 1. So you're right to say that the Camelot Kings generally are very good at farming up throughout the early, bringing a slower pace, making sure that these teams can't just be dominant around the objectives. And it was a draft for the Olympus Bolts that was very good at doing exactly that. Once they set up a defensive position in game 1, I mean, how do you walk into Sanctified Field? How do you walk into Descent of Madness? You probably just don't want to, and the Camelot Kings didn't, and that's why they fell behind. But you have to, you just have to think about that, right? You have to think, game 1, we lost super early on, so maybe a little bit more early presence from the Camelot Kings needs to be the answer. Just something that can act as that bridge. Gilgamesh banned, of course, so can't play that, but that is a style of pick that could alleviate some of that pressure. Erlang Shen, Osiris, Vamana, even to a certain extent, Hunbots around these objective fights with Fear No Evil can all pseudo fill that role. So it's not as if they're pigeonholed. I just want to see something from Twig that can keep his team afloat.
Yeah, something that can kind of get the ball rolling early, something that can jump in at level 5 or maybe pre-level 5 and make some kind of that impact out there. Very similar auto-attack style of gods out in the jungle as you highlight between the Erlang Shen and the Osiris that can maybe go their way or go towards more some of those ability base, because you can never go wrong with a Fear No Evil. I mean, level 5, probably one of the strongest points that you can have for Hunbats until you get late game, and then you can maybe 2-tap some of the carries out there when you get things like Hydra's procs and Heart Seekers going out there. So a lot of options available to CaptainTwig, no stranger to being able to flex his god pool. Could even go towards maybe some more of the more auto-tech-centric assassins. Things like BaRRaCCuDDa are still right up his wheelhouse.
J-Mac, I'm struggling, man. We are hypothesizing and postulating
we're just waiting
and
to
positing and waiting and thinking about picks that we just don't know are going on. But I suppose that all we can do is continue to try and address the issues that had arisen in game 1. And Hunbots is a pick that can be that. I just heard from production. It is a Vamana lock-in this time for the Camelot Kings. There's your early aggression. That's how you get involved. Play around this Vamana, get that Colossal Fury engaged, run down anybody throughout the early portions. If you're not contending with an Ankh, your healing's still pretty good. You could get people off these objectives.
Yeah, it does seem to be that Ankh has been the clear answer to Vamana every time that we have seen it drafted. Typically, the support is picking that one up. I think level 8, the last time that we saw it was when a fully upgraded Curse Ankh was bought and try to deal with Vamana's healing as early as possible. It makes it so difficult to get through. But I think you're going to talk about, especially still, Gilgamesh into some of these less mobile Vamana into some of these less mobile mages.
That's
very
right.
easy at being able to lock them down, chase them down, and with that Colossal Fury, just makes it so difficult to peel. So now that we are in that same vein, does CaptainTwig still maybe try and put his focus out in the mid line, kind of help BigManTingz make it through that early stage?
J-Mac, I'm gonna reach out to you for some help here. Who's Ven playing?
Oh my goodness, it's been so long since we've seen the picks and bans. Is there a way that we can maybe get a graphic
Production,
back
help
up?
us!
Can we maybe get a little bit of a help
Oh,
there?
there
with
it is.
Vamana? Okay, so it's going to be the AMC.
Okay.
So AMC up against Vamana. It has been a while. I forgot the AMC was actually the one locked in. So Vamana into AMC, is that a matchup that you would really see that CaptainTwig can find some success in?
That's a hard one, right? Because AMC's got such good defense shred. One of the main strengths of Vamana is that survivability throughout the early. Transforming into the massive baby, sure, pretty strong, but AMC's really all about that immediate burst damage. That's not to say that you can't stick to them. You certainly can. It's whether or not you win the DPS trade once you get there. Golden Blade first item Vamana might be able to do it, but that's a thin margin window. We're talking 2, 3 items in the build. There might be an inflection point where all of a sudden AMC starts winning out in that 1v1. And even evaluating the 1v1 is pretty tough because how often is it a 1v1 in mid? Pretty seldom. But yeah, I think Vamana could either rotate towards the AMC or probably a little bit more likely in the early game towards this Freya.
Yeah, Freya does seem to be the topic of conversation. Anytime that we see this one picked up and we kind of talk about, whoa, where does the jungler go? Where does the support put a lot of focus? It typically does end up being on this Freya. Did eat a little bit of a nerf on this patch, 5 base damage taken off of all of her levels for her pulse, but still very, very heavy in the early game damage she's able to output. The buff to Conduit gem really seemed to have also given a double rise over towards this Gods. So I gotta imagine for the Camelot Kings, you don't want this Freya to get online too early, so maybe throw a little bit of pressure over in that dual lane. But for the Camelot, or for the Olympus Bolts, however, maybe the ball's in their court. I mean, we talked a lot about this Ravana into the Poseidon matchup, how that is going to be a successful one. Do you mostly stick to the mid lane and try and keep BigManTingz down? Or with this Ravana, you maybe try and focus out, maybe put some pressure over on Netrioid too?
I mean, Robin's always going to be an opportunistic ganker. You always want to go wherever someone's out of position, but you are right to say that Kraken just doesn't work against Robin. Literally ever. Even if overhead his kick is down, if you're initiating with the ultimate, the damage mitigation that you get from that alone is enough to offset Kraken at least throughout the early. It's a massive burst ability, but you need a couple of items before it's getting to that point, and Robin's survivability should make that an even later goalpost, pushing that goalpost further back, if you would. So Poseidon, a great target of aggression. Early portions, you can even try and lock down this Artio. You can overhead kick the stun and bear stance. You can root her mid-dash, and all of a sudden she's stuck there as well. So decent chase down potential there. And then, as you said, the dual lane, still a decent option, maybe a little bit less so, because Robin actually has an interesting interaction with Giddy Up. If you chase it with your ultimate, depending on timing, you might just get kicked away regardless.
Yeah, potentially so. Getting genetics on this Yemoja, though, is a pick that's brought him a lot of success. A 1-0-10 and a 0-1-8 for the last 2 games played, and that's not even counting at least game 1 now is up against the Scarabs. Can the Camelot Kings bring it back in game number 2 to tie up the set, or the Olympus Bolts going to run away? We'll throw it over to Dolson and Gormizer one more time.
I think you forgot who you were for a second there, Gord.
I forget who I am for a second sometimes, too.
What's your name?
What?
What's your name?
Who am I?
Where are we?
What is my name? When you introduce
What
yourself,
is a
how do you
name?
introduce yourself? That's actually a really good question.
I think I say Dave a good bit of the time.
You say Dave, you don't like, oh, I'm David?
Yeah, David feels more formal. If I'm in like an interview, I'll say David.
Ah.
But that's
So you
been-
lie to people who interview you is what you're telling
But
me.
that's been
That's a
5 years.
really bad first impression, Dave.
No, my real name is David, so I tell the truth. But I also haven't had like an interview in 5 years.
Good. Hey, nice. That's good.
Well,
Job
it depends
security.
what kind of interview we're talking about. Because
I was
any
going to say, the interview for this job was, hey, come in and cast some
Right,
games.
come in and
We
cast
wanna
some
hear.
games. Said this guy can be a fool on camera. And then any interview I've done over the past 5 years has been me as Dolson. So that's been,
Yeah.
it's not been Dave or
I
David.
forget because if I'm introducing myself,
Yeah.
immediately my instinct is my name's William.
Yeah.
No one in chat knows that. It shows up all the
No.
time. They don't know my name's William.
No, and Gore,
It's
Katie,
blowing their mind
Katie
right
will
now.
call you Will and
Katie
William
calls me Will.
sometimes, and it's still
My mom, so she hates nicknames. Named my brother Joshua and named me William.
Yeah.
That's wild to me, man.
Josh, Will, right?
Yeah, she's like, oh, I don't like nicknames. Okay, I'm going to give you the most nicknameable names I possibly can, though.
Well, Gore, we had some nicknames for the Kings and the Bolts in Game 1. We described the Kings as sort of the knotted up, the very clean-cut movie villain with how they play Smite, and the Olympus Bolts a bit more raggedy. I would argue the roles were reversed in Game 1.
Yeah.
The Olympus Bolts played such a clean brand of Smite in the first game. All the objectives, all of the kills except for one went the way of the Olympus Bolts. And just looked so clean for this squad. Apologize to everyone for the game sound. We are actively working on it. And this is nightmare scenario for chat. If they don't like our voices, Gordon, this is all they got.
It's the inverse of what
right.
most people want. There's
Right.
no game audio, just us, as
just
opposed
us.
to just game audio, no us.
The cool sounds of Dave and Gore for game number 1. No, we're in game 2. The Camelot Kings versus the Olympus Bolts. Yeah, oh, that's a good idea. All right, game
Enact
sounds,
the
Gore.
game sounds.
Boom, boom. Ah! What'd she say? Whoop!
We both have to choose separate sounds.
Yeah, that's right. We're doing the same. We're doing the wrong thing.
I had to get the potion in there.
We can chair 1 and chair 2 the game sounds. Like I'll do the team fights and you'll
You'll
do
do-
the. You get the boring. I get the chaos and you get the twig. Ching. I don't know what a stun sound is, but it's a slow walking. Doom, 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 doom. All right. Because it's so clear what an umbrella running. Doom, 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 doom. Ting, ting, shing.
No,
and
the
then-
umbrella does like.
Yeah, oh, you're so much better at it than I am.
It's the sound that he
Here we
makes
go,
when
here
he's
we go.
running forward.
Ding, 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 ding.
Oh, this one has game audio.
Oh, it does. No shot I'm making that. Boom, boom. Yeah, all right, fine, Gore. And then she goes, whoop, shing, or the beads. Yeah, we're kind of close. Appreciate everybody's patience. We'll get the actual game audio rolling for you here very quickly.
I thought that was going to be the rest of the cast. That's only 2 minutes. We got a lot of work cut in for.
Gore, you know what's unlucky is that's probably people are like, just do this all the time. Don't talk to us. use.
Let's analyze individual game sounds.
They don't have a pair of coconuts that I could use for Netrioid on the Chiron this game.
Are you suggesting coconuts migrate?
What is the airspeed velocity of an unladen
Laden
swallow? African or European? Ah, nice, Tyler. Production says it at the same time. I don't know. And then he gets sent into the nether. All right, Gore, let's do some analysis. We spent 3 minutes and 45 seconds fooling around a bit here. Do have some comps to break down because, yeah, somehow we got to get this back on track. LASBRA on the Robin. Normally see that over in the solo lane. And Gore, it's actually going to be one of our recent and maybe only looks at Ravana out of the jungle. Haddix playing the Cerberus up against CaptainTwig on the Vamana with the very well-sounding or the very on-point sounding umbrella FX that we've got. Could be an early game brawl between these two junglers.
Yeah, I honestly expect to see LASBRA do this, right? Get aggressive early on.
And BigManTingz rooted and gobbled up. But doesn't matter because LASBRA has gotten first blood and the Kraken goes searching for an impact in the Olympus Bolts, and LASBRA rotate into mid and get Ven off to another good start. That's AMC swung later on in the game in game 1. So having that get going now in game 2, great luck for the Bolts.
Dave, it's just the quacking noise. We'd have to do the quacking.
What? I don't know what a quacking sounds like. Is it?
It's like a rubber.
That's like Donald Duck. That is kind of Donald Duck.
That is very Donald Duck.
Yeah, I don't know what the quacking as a.
It's really, if I remember correctly, it is just one big like, but it has like a lot of like
Right.
depth and reverb behind it.
Gore, you've been on point with every single bit of audio. I have missed every mark. I've been embracing the chaos. You can do it if you want at the back end of this.
Well,
That's
actually,
just a
hear
blink
it,
forward, a root. Let's see how close you were. That is much funnier than I thought it would be. It was oh, we got it! We got it! Welcome back, everybody. We got game audio. Appreciate everybody's patience. No more. Now you and I are forced to actually focus on the game and can't do game
Now
audio.
we can compare our sounds to the in-game sounds. I don't know what you mean. We just
mine are worse. Yours are like relatively on point. Mine are horrible. Yours are fine. But did see first blood for LASBRA. Gets an early kill onto BigManTingz on the Poseidon. And look, that's what you want on a Ravana jungle, right?
Yes,
When
it
you
is.
see it in solo, the game pace is totally different. When you see it in jungle, you want it active early.
Yeah, and he's able to do so. I mean, that was a perfect example of it, right? Really good leap, avoids the Kraken, has a good route, can chase him down after the beads. I mean, that was exactly what you needed. Now, you're still in a good spot to keep the fight going.
What is Ven doing up here?
Yeah.
Ven is on his own in the Camelot Kings side of the jungle, and Ven falls for first blood. Netrioid will be the second, though. I keep saying first blood. First kill of the game for the Camelot Kings.
Much faster this time, though.
Much faster this time, though. And the Olympus Bolts are at least able to answer back. Snag one on the Netrioid, and it's BaRRaCCuDDa who gets it. So on one hand, you get Captaintwig, a good kill. On the flip side, Ven drops, but BaRRaCCuDDa picks up a kill. A nice one-for-one trade for both teams.
I think when you look at it and maybe compare slash lines in the mid lane, though, you start to see the value, right? 0 and 1 can be similar between both, but then the 2 versus the 0, that Tingz has in the assist column. Should still be a little bit of assists or experience over there for Venenu. That feels pretty solid. This is actually a good part of the game for Tingz. Having the Doom Orb should feel better.
And in goes LASBRA towards Variety. Yeah, nothing more to be done there. Variety with Genji's already somewhat tanky enough to avoid a good bit of the pressure that LASBRA and Haddix will be putting out over there in solo. So I think even just 1.5, 2 items in, Gore, it's going to take a hefty impact from both of these junglers to get anything going over in solo lane.
Yeah, and with the way that the builds are specifically, you've got 2 Guardians that are going to be very tanky against each other. So it's not like you can rely heavily on Variety or Haddix's damage. You are strictly doing what you can out of the jungle. Where I would give maybe a little leg up, at least in that lane, to Twig, just because he has a big knock-up to engage the fight with, then a slow to follow through. You know, LASBRA's got the root, he has good chase down, but I think that knock-up initially, if you catch him in the middle of the lane, at least gives you a couple more hits in there. They're both still tanks, so I don't think it really matters. At the end of the day, you're going to go over and really just pad damage stats, I think, more than find a kill, unless they're already low by the time you get there.
So, teams equal as far as gold goes. Still took a couple of minutes in game number 1 despite early pressure. We're going to stick the solo lane pressure. Here's your immense impact from the jungle. Stun from Variety, but a slow. Actually might get this Artio out. Whirlpool down, and yes, Variety does in fact survive, but Variety will have to go back to base. Doesn't have teleport, and Haddix can free farm up in this lane a little bit. So small advantage to the Olympus Bolts. Again, you know, it doesn't always take a kill, Gore, to keep the opposing solo laner behind. Just forcing Variety back and then to walk all the way back to lane. He'll miss maybe about half a wave, potentially a full wave to this tower.
Maybe you'll see something go poorly for Twig as well. Again, there's that knock-up. And if that happens closer to the King's Tower line, then maybe you're able to find some more damage. Admittedly, you'd want more help. That's just to help farm up, make sure that the lane doesn't get out of control. Don't lose the tower, don't get a lot of farm for free. Haddix already has the 1 level advantage, though.
Awesome Jake looked at by Genetics and BigManTingz. Riptide out from Genetics. Now, Trelly, I wouldn't, complain is not the right word, but Trelly always talks about how Genetics plays this Yemoja and might end the game with like 1,000 damage because Genetics just spams Riptide, spams River Tribute. He's already beat 1,000, so a bit off by Trelly. But it also looks like Chronos Pendant for Genetics, so while that is actually how Genetics plays this pick a good bit of the time. Seen more stuns, seen a bit more damage already from this Yemoja, so potentially a bit more aggressive with the Chronos Pendant.
I think that, you know, it's one of those things that might be considered a mark against Genetics, but like, look at Yemoja's kit. Your bubble, your Moonstrike, and your ult are going to be what you're using for damage. Like, your 2 is exclusively getting thrown out for heals for your team, most of the time shielding, if you end up going the route of the Lotus Crown, things like that. And then your Riptides are used to pull people in, push people out. Either way, you know, you're not, those aren't going to be aggressively used. Well, they can be aggressively used, but not in a way that is going to be damaging, right? So your Moonstrike doesn't have a lot of damage on it. Your ult has a 140-second cooldown. Yemoja's not supposed to get a lot of damage in the game. It is, but I think the way Genetics plays her is to a T. And while it might be less flashy sometimes in terms of where the damage comes from, I still think you get some really, really gnarly Riptides from him that pull people in that look good. You get some really good-looking walls from the ults. And it's just the, what, almost 2.5 full minutes that you have to wait between the ults minimum that maybe slows some of that down. That's such a long time.
It is
140 seconds.
140
is so
seconds.
long, man.
Yeah.
My favorite thread on Twitter, I don't know if it's continued updating, but there was like things you can do within 200 or 140 seconds while waiting for Yemoja ult to respawn.
Run through every game sound in the current match, probably. I will say, I'm sad nobody died on that first blood fight on left. I was really excited about doing like an exaggerated like character dying sound.
Oh, I thought you wanted to do like a first blood.
Yeah, that too potentially, but really it was like the dramatic death that I was looking for. CaptainTwig takes a lot of damage here, but will survive. Pyromancer though goes over to the Olympus Bolts. That's just good old-fashioned pressure around the objectives, forcing the Camelot Kings back and Colossal Fury out of Twig. So talk about long ultimate cooldowns. Colossal Fury, not a very short cooldown either. And so you're looking at potential team fights later in the game where if the Bolts are either able to bait certain ultimates out from the Camelot Kings I mean, 90 seconds, all right. So not
Par for the course.
not disgustingly long, but if the type of ultimate that is easier to force defensive use from,
Oh,
you
yes,
know,
it is.
if he's being jumped on, Colossal Fury away, those types of things. So if you see a River's Rebuke, Vamana ultimate get used, those types of things later in the game could be detrimental. Then rotating back out of mid, it's the Camelot Kings on the Bolt side of the jungle this time. Netrioid galloping away, and Valkyrie's discretion puts him in the dirt. Didn't have Centaurus to fight in. Now CaptainTwig, without Colossal Fury, gets the double knock-up into the double stun from Genetics.
Ooh.
But a pluck from Jake forces the beads. BigManTingz pulled in, and BigManTingz pulled down Olympus. Bolts find 2 more.
That was beautifully played from every player on the Bolts there, but special shout-outs to Haddix. Hits the stun onto Tings, then gets the ult. The beads had just been forced prior to that, so that is a good play. And again, like you said,
Wow.
You're forcing a lot of the defensive utility from the Kings. All you need to do, it's exactly as you highlighted it, pressure them while they don't have these ults. They're easy to rip away, and that is what can happen when you strip them out of there. You get a good play from BaRRA as well. I think good pathing. The only thing that starts out wrong for them is the fact that Genetics is the aggressor and locks down Vin for a little bit.
Yeah.
Other than that, everything was clean, everything was clear. And that's the problem I think that the Kings are going to have to face into, is a lot of the damage, you know, when they realized, oh, we can't really kill off the Vamana right now, let's just go on Netrioid then? Yeah, we'll kill the Chiron. Let's put another kill onto him. Same thing for Tings. They just kind of redirect wherever that aggression was going onto the more, at least slightly less mobile characters that the Kings have.
Yeah. Like them playing around Ven in the last couple of games. Yes, LASBRA's been active, but Ven has really been on point, hitting the proper targets. And the rest of the team from the Bolts turning their eyes towards the stingered target and finishing off that health bar very, very quickly. Could be CaptainTwig this time, though again, Colossal Fury there. You want to see him be able to use it aggressively in one of these fights. In the same way, you don't want to see a defensive Mystic Rush from LASBRA all that often. That's what happens here. Erendite picked up for Laz. So a nice second item on use of his ultimate. And then Jotun's Wrath to start, so very ability-based. A bit, I mean, unusual, maybe not the right word, but normally, you know, we'll see a Transcendence, Hydras, Heart Seekers, things like that early in the build. So a bit unique for Laz here.
To me, it means that LASBRA's looking to chase people down, right? Like, LASBRA wants to find kills, and he's going to stick to you, and that's going to be perfect for you, because, you know, you're using your ult to go in. Now you're going to have the extra move speed to continue chasing that person. You'll have your root. It's going to make it so that people like Twig, Netrioid, who all have a dash, you know, the Riptides from Genetics, but even BigManTingz, who has a lot of move speed, that's going to come from the Doom Orb, from the Trident as well on his 2. A lot of the escape capabilities for the Kings is going to be dealt with because of this item, so it lets LASBRA stick to him a little more.
This awesome Jake was forward, but dashes away from the Quack, and BigManTingz drops it. I don't know if that's a BigManTingz play. I think that's just...
That's it. No, that's just the unfortunate nature of Poseidon versus Sobek.
Yeah, good bait and switch from Awesome Jake, able to get out of the Kraken. And Olympus Bolts pulled themselves about 1,000 gold, closer to 2,000 actually gold in the lead. Bit of a spike up over the last couple of minutes from the Camelot Kings. The first neutral objectives both go to the Bolts. Pyromancer will be up in about a minute's time. And I think what the Bolts have done so well in the last couple of games is really playing around LASBRA and Ven in the mid. Yeah. Those two, they rotate to Pyro, look for a kill. If they can't find a kill, they've at least won the health battle. They get the Pyro. Do the same thing over on the Gold Fury side. Oh my goodness. Okay, we're tower diving BaRRaCCuDDa, but why? Another tower shot into CaptainTwig. Nearly turned around the kill. That is, Gore, that's got to be wishful thinking. Everything from Centaurus has got to hit there. That needs to go perfectly for it to work out. Luckily for the Kings, Twig does stay alive.
Oh, now Variety, though, admittedly should stay alive. No, they're going to go in. The Stinger at least gets scooped up. I mean, good plays from the Kings to get out, but it's all defensive.
Genetics throws up River's Rebuke. How worried is Awesome Jake? Not very. Lurking in the waters. He'll crash forth here in just a moment. Yeah, the health battle outside of Awesome Jake feels okay for the Bolts, but Netrioid rotates over from right, and the Chiron will provide plenty of poke damage. LASBRA still has Mystic Rush. Ven still has Stinger. Oh, man. That is a banish onto Genetics that nearly paid off for a kill. Stinger into one as well as LASBRA considering a tier 1 tower dive here. Kings have to know that Laz is somewhere lurking close by. Crack it up, crack it down. And BigManTingz has caught Awesome Jake asleep at the wheel, and that has got to be now the end of this aggression for the Bolts.
That's so awkward because LASBRA, again, there's so many people that you could potentially go in on, try to find the kill. If Netrioid, or if he had been on the other side and caught Netrioid off guard, might have been able to kill him off. I mean, look at that, less than half health, and they're not able to find anything. That's just a good Kraken, exactly what you want to see from the Kings. And maybe an overzealous stay from the Bolts. I mean, there's no reason, like after you forced a lot of relics, you forced ults, you forced them under the tier 1, outside of diving the tower, which they clearly didn't want to do. I don't know what their goal was there. Maybe get a couple of kills, open up for a Pyromancer, something like that, but they just didn't really have the, I think, pressure that they thought they did. And once that Stinger went through and despawned, I think that's when they probably should have completely called it back and not gone in. They got a lot of good damage out there, though, so I think you can't underestimate the Bolts in circumstances like that. It's just they needed like 2 more minutes or maybe another item for Jake before doing a full tower dive would have worked out better.
That's a good fight back for the Camelot Kings and exactly what this squad needed. Something just to stall the momentum of the Olympus Bolts, who've really been able to spearhead, again, whether it's the neutral objectives or tower, spearhead exactly where they want their damage to fall. Jake looks for the pluck, but a bit off the mark. Then Riptide from Genetics sends the team back towards the left. LASBRA has chased down BigManTingz with the Mystic Rush, and Colossal Fury swinging away in the backline. That'll be a kill. Handed over to Netrioid. 1-for-1 trade. BigManTingz down, and so is Les.
It's the weird balance. I think that killing off Tings, while maybe is not, well, experience-wise is going to be a little more worthwhile for you. And team fight-wise is definitely more worthwhile for you. Sucks when you lose LASBRA, but you get rid of the Kraken, you get rid of Tings' Aegis as well. And so it at least opens up some opportunities for you in the near future. And that's the thing, you know, I think it was Hindu yesterday was talking about it. Maybe hold that. I thought Twig's pulled Pluck back.
Yeah, gotta be a kill on the Twig. Pluck into Stinger into damage, just way too much from the Olympus Bolts. Now Variety just hoping to get out alive. The slow connects. A slight disruption with the Riptide, but you're watching for the Pluck from Jake. And it strikes home. A Riptide once more won't save Variety's life, and the Bolts stick around in mid, find 2 more kills, and wouldn't you guess it, Gore? A Primal Fury has just spawned. Well timed for the Olympus Bolts.
I'm going to, I attempt to quote you actually from earlier today during Picks and Bans, where you looked at the draft the Bolts had and you went, ugh, that late game.
Oh yeah.
And we're seeing it come into fruition, right? Like a pluck into Vin with BaRRA, like that damage that they're going to be able to combine. Freya, you know, while it takes a little longer and I think doesn't do as much as like an Olorun can, I think Sanctified Fields gives him a lot of weight. Freya's strengths are elsewhere, right? Sanctified Fields is typically where you're looking for an Olorun. Then you start to examine the other abilities and stuff like that and how hard he can hit. Freya just kills you. And when you're 2-0-3, you've got to level up and you've got the setup between a Cerberus and a Sobek on your team. Freya is getting funneled kills. And you've got backup because you've got Vin dealing that damage as well. So you really do have a lot of capabilities to just kill anybody that gets in your way.
Wow, another tower dive. This one should be successful. CaptainTwig has got the damage and the Colossal Fury to get out, but there was a Stinger onto Twig. And LASBRA has just turned towards Genetics and gotten the kill on the left side of this lane as CaptainTwig has kept running. Kraken didn't do much for BigManTingz. Haddix considered going in, but another 1-for-1 trade. This time, though, Ven goes down in exchange for Genetics. That's probably a trade the Kings will take.
Yeah, although you get a TKO technically here on Twig, he has to go defend the Trebuchet, so that's as good as sending him back to base because he's still going to have to back after this. Burn the beads from Netrioid. If that stun connects from Haddix, then that is an immediate ult. It's going to be a kill, and Netrioid is gone. Maybe opens up the Fire Giant, but now they have to play it a little more patiently. I think hoping the Kings would think they were going that way, especially with the pathing they took. They just get a Greater Scorpion, though. No FG plays on the board. I think that that's a good call, right? You see a couple of beads get used to get away from the slow, from the whirlpool, from BigManTingz, make sure that they can get aggressive, play a little stronger. And I think the Cerberus is putting in numbers. Look, 1-0-2 doesn't look crazy. The damage numbers actually are a little crazier than I think they should be at 8K. That's just some solo lane padding right there. But also, Haddix has been playing really well with positioning and things like that. And if Vin lives, then not only is that a Fire Giant, you probably see a couple more kills. That's a good dive, and admittedly a good retreat from Twig.
The slow burn, though, continues for the Bolts, even with more kills for the Kings this game. Gold lead building up, over 2,500. closing in on 3 here shortly in both gold and experience. Yeah, there's just a lot of tankiness and a lot of late game damage for the Olympus Bolts. BigManTingz will scale up nicely though. Saw the Kraken tickle a couple of Olympus Bolts targets just a moment ago. They get the Soul Reaver online. Charon's coin will stack up just a bit later on. Bumba's hammer eventually will make BigManTingz very, very difficult to deal with. And so the Camelot Kings do have the opportunity, Gore, to buy their time. And CaptainTwig has already shown us outside of a couple tower dives, one successful, one unsuccessful, that this Vamana left undisrupted into the backline makes life difficult for Ven, maybe specifically on the AMC.
Well, that's where we're starting to see. You've got the Ankh, you've got a Pestilence, you've got a Brawlers, you've got things built up by the Bolts to help deal with this Vamana's dive and stop Twig from being able to do that play over and over again. I'm also keeping my eyes, it was just highlighted, but you've got 2 shells. BaRRA and Vin both have it. One of them I have to assume is going to be a Phantom Shell at some point.
Awesome Jake again looking for the block, but this time doesn't work out. But he'll be able to back away just fine, and a Pyromancer up, and a Pyromancer secured by the Olympus Bolts. It is like clockwork with these neutral objectives.
And it's the ultimate conversation. Bolts have the faster burn. If you leave them alone with an objective, they're going to kill it before you can react. Better secure for the Kings, though. I mean, you've got a Kraken. That's what I was trying to say earlier. Hindu, I think, was talking about it yesterday, where it's just, no matter what, in SMITE, for years and years and years and years and years, everything gets a little more interesting when there's a Kraken on the board. And that's what this is it's a little more interesting.
Haddix now being chased down, has the ultimate and survives, but a River's Rebuke is up, and that'll trap the Camelot Kings underneath the Tier 1 tower. But able to walk out is CaptainTwig. BaRRaCCuDDa chases down Variety. Genetics the next target. LASBRA finds the root, and LASBRA gets the kill. And the 3 remaining members of the Camelot Kings, Twig, Tings, and Netrioid, headed for the Tier 2.
I mean, that was 3-4 ults used just to kill off Haddix. I think the Bolts, you leverage this. You have so much. Haddix is going to be able to teleport in. I think you make a play for the Fire Giant here.
And none of the remaining targets of the Kings are all that tanky. I mean, you might be able to send Jake in to tank up this FG, but none of Twig, Tings, or Netrioid can step up without getting shredded down.
They don't have ults?
Don't have ults, don't have Kraken, don't have Centaurus. The Olympus Bolts find 2 picks onto the tanky members of the Camelot Kings, and LASBRA will look towards the backline as the Fire Giant is secured, and at least Netrioid lives. But Gord, game 1, 25-minute on the dot Fire Giant. Game 2, we're doing it a little bit quicker.
And the thing that's at least has me flabbergasted, the Kings, prior to that engagement on right, could have defended and would have defended the Fire Giant. It's just, we have Twig using his ult to go onto the tower to kill Haddix. We have Tings dropping the Kraken. We have Genetics dropping the walls. We have Netrioid dropping the Centaurus. Like, 4 ults, all to burn through Haddix. Haddix uses his beads and his ult, and when he respawns, one of those is back. Yeah, you've got 60 seconds to work with it, but you have so much invested at the beginning of that fight for 1 kill that then the Bolts are able to walk in and say, cool, Vin doesn't even use his beads. Neither of the carries use their shells. It's just the relics from the kind of frontliners, the ones who are in the fray there, and then the beads from BaRRA. So it feels like maybe too much from the Kings.
Here's your chance if you're the Kings to get a Fire Giant buff. Off of Haddix, maybe, but he's going to use the Stygian Torment.
He doesn't even have it.
It is disaster suddenly for the Camelot Kings. They thought they caught one of the Bolts off guard, but instead now the Kings being run down. Genetics plucked back, and Genetics should fall here shortly. A lurking in the waters will slow him down. A root from LASBRA and a kill from Ven. And that feels like a desperation call from the Kings.
Yes.
When you're hiding in the Bolts jungle, hoping to catch out a target, at 25 minutes into the game, it is just not going your way. And what's worse is it does not work. In fact, it works against you, as Genetics will fall, and so will a Tier 1 and a Tier 2 on left.
And the one guy you try to lock down is the same guy you just had to drop 4 ults into 2 minutes earlier to try and kill. I think that is just well played from the Bolts. I mean, they're playing this cleanly, and the Kings, like you said, a desperation move, but now they're in a 3v5 on the left side Phoenix.
CaptainTwig takes a lot of damage from BaRRaCCuDDa and the rest of the team. Kraken, again, off the mark. Stygian Torment takes some beads, only 1 set off of BigManTingz. I was going to say, the Bolts pushed forward a bit there. I was wondering if we were looking for an end. Still a couple of towers left on the map. And a banish onto Variety will secure the disengage.
Honestly, if the death timer was like, let's say, 10 seconds longer and their relics were in a slightly healthier position in terms of the relic economy for them, I think they could have gone for it, right? It's risky play, but it's one of those things that it would have been open. Now, you're in a good spot. Your relics are going to be coming back up. Ults are going to be coming back up. You might lose this Gold Fury to the Kings. If you back up too far, which is, at this point, that's an acceptable loss. I don't think you really care about the Gold Fury. If you can steal, if you can take this fight, go for it, but I don't know if they need it.
Are we fighting over the Gold Fury at this point in the game? Netrioid jumped on by both Haddix and LASBRA in the back of the fight. Genetics again plucked back. Genetics has just not been able to operate this game. At least CaptainTwig finds a kill onto Venenu, but CaptainTwig will keep the ball going with the double kill on the jungler, and now suddenly the Camelot Kings have found a bit of momentum in this game, and the Vamana finds the backline. It's the perfect targets. Ven and BaRRaCCuDDa both run down by CaptainTwig on the big baby.
And you burned the beads off BaRRa that he'd been holding on to, so now that's going to be a little bit longer. Fire Giant, it's going to come back by the time the FGs respawn, but you've at least managed to mitigate, if you're the Kings, mitigate losses. If you're the Bolts, kind of take an unacceptable loss. I mean, you really didn't need to defend that, I think, anywhere near as heavily as they did. I don't even know that you should have cared about it, if I'm being honest with you. I mean, you had what felt like, I think, a 5,000 gold lead, 4 towers up. You were already on the back foot. Losing that Gold Fury there chunks it down to a 4K gold lead, but you all still maintain your buff. You can then, back by Fire Giant, or not by Fire Giant, by wards, and then, reset for your position. You're still going to be able to reset, but you burn, your beads a little unnecessarily. 40 seconds after the FG respawns, that BaRRa's not going to have that. So it's just those little moments that are now openings for the Kings that didn't need to be there. And at the end of the day, it looks like they're still going to get the Gold Fury.
They will get the Gold Fury. All right. So Avenue's back in the game for the Camelot Kings, keeping the gold lead respectable. 3,000 exactly for the Bolts. Going to tilt a bit back up with the Pyromancer. And we don't often get to talk about an actual well-timed Pyromancer. Actually, a decent time for it. 30 seconds for the Fire Giant.
Really
well timed. Be able to go back. Maybe search for a pick. If you lose some health here, no big deal. You'd be a little bit speedier heading back towards the right side of the map. I don't know if it is, I was going to say strategy changing, but now it might be. Look, you got 15 seconds till the FG is respawn. That is a hefty amount of damage, all from Netrioid. If you can reset, use the Pyromancer to get back, but with 5 seconds left, Gore, the Kings may now have an opportunity to insta-pull the FG if they think that the carries of the Bolts are gone.
As wild as it is to say this, the biggest thing is that Ting still has Kraken. The Krakens in the team fights, sometimes they've been great, sometimes they've missed completely. But around the objective, good news, Fire Giant doesn't move.
No,
you know where it's going to be. And I was wondering if they were going to try to pull it just because of the secure that they had. But you don't really get anything insane. 20 seconds still left. I think BaRRa, that's what the Bolts are waiting on, right? They need the relic economy. They've got Fire Minions helping them out. You're in a 4v5 now. You get to take back all the pressure you just lost.
You're going to see CaptainTwig on the map, and you're going to realize nobody on the Camelot Kings has teleport. Twig is going to let the minions walk into the Titan room because the left side Phoenix is going to respawn here shortly. That'll strand those Fire Minions a bit in no man's land. So the Titan will lose a bit of damage. We'll heal it up here in just a bit of time if it doesn't just kill off the minions on their own. The Olympus Bolts start up the now enhanced Fire Giant. As CaptainTwig lurks, this Vamana is about the only thing that's consistently hit its target for the Kings this game, though we just saw big Centaurus poke damage from Netrioid could also be a difference maker.
Yeah, it ults back up. If he can find, onto Vin and BaRRa, that was a flabbergasting amount of damage that he was able to do just from, 2 shots, I think, that connected from the ult and then the masterful shot. And not only is it going to die, they have more Fire Minions on the way, so it's going to be an advantage for the Bolts no matter what.
So Phoenix on left is in all likelihood going to go back down. Another full wave of Fire Minions has reached the left side Phoenix, and it seems like the Camelot Kings realize that is just their fight to take. Just now, Phoenix falls. And maybe the Bolts weren't looking for much more other than delay, but now the Camelot Kings have pulled the Fire Giant. Olympus Bolts close by.
LASBRA.
In the back goes Variety. LASBRA has done the same on the other side of the map. Centaurus hits BaRRaCCuDDa and deals mountains of damage. LASBRA unable to find the backline, but CaptainTwig is, and a Vamana swinging away. BaRRaCCuDDa run down. Venenu has been as well. And suddenly the Camelot Kings have found the carries again. Awesome Jake takes the Kraken, and Awesome Jake has got to leave.
This is a good spot for them to be in if you're the King. Yeah, surge forward, get the kill. LASBRA and Haddix to defend. Neither have their ults.
Wow, the backline is just...
Both still have beads, but I mean, this should be an easy Fire Giant scoop up, although no Kraken means that there is still an opportunity for the Bolts to try and make a hero play.
Ghastly Breath. Bit of range damage from LASBRA, but you got to be careful here. If you die, if you're the Olympus Bolts,
It's a huge stagger.
may end up just being game over with how heavy that stagger would be. Enhanced Fire Giant. Low for the Camelot Kings. Haddix trying desperately to get close, but realizing he won't be able to, and the Camelot Kings have won a fight. And for the first time this set, now really take control. Enhanced FG on all 5 members. Gold is even, but is it really when the Kings have enhanced FG? And Gore, the backline dive, it is what Vamana is made to do.
Yep.
You go big, you walk down an AMC, you walk down a Freya after the Valkyrie's discretion, and you win the fight.
And a lot of factors. There's a lot of things that work out for the Kings there. So a good play from Twig, but it would have had a problem if Jake was further back with him, right? And that's the thing. The separation was Haddix, Vin, and BaRRA, and LASBRA, and Jake. So not only is your cursed Ankh the thing to help deal with exactly the dive that Twig went with, is away from the team fight, nowhere near in a position to try and help deal with that ultimate. There was also a moment where Jake hit a pluck onto Tingz while LASBRA was leaping, doing an up-down to hit Tingz with the ultimate. So, you know, they miscommunicate. Maybe a kill that could have happened there onto the Poseidon that doesn't end up happening. You're not in a good position to end up helping your carries. They end up having to use both relics and still dying. I think it was a sloppy and separated fight from the Bolts, and the Kings read it so well. I mean, the way they group up in the middle, the way that Twig is able to dive, the knockups from this Vamana, it's something that, you know, we used to see with the Erlong Shen turtle, but now being able to see it in full effect and then the big baby chase down was just well played. And I think from the back of a bad Gold Fury fight from the Bolts that let the Kings come back into this game a lot better, this has been a really big turnaround for this team.
Man, the Kings able to buy their time in this game. Looked like the Bolts were just going to run away with it again, but CaptainTwig drags his team forward. Netrioid has really scaled well into this late game as well.
His late game damage is nuts.
That's just what Chiron does. Eventually you get there, one Centaurus. You don't even use Centaurus defensively anymore. You just start to play with it to find poke damage. And that's ultimately the big difference maker. A couple more fire minion waves will spawn for the Bolts on the left side of the map. The Phoenix is going to be respawning here shortly. LASBRA was consistently winning 1v1s against Twig in Game 1. That was a big difference maker. Hasn't been the case here in Game 2, though both junglers having standout performances for their team. Variety is extended behind the Phoenix, and Variety will get run down. Variety will live, though. CaptainTwig yet again into the back line, but the Olympus Bolts able to peel out for themselves this time. Gotta be a kill, and it is. Awesome Jake gets the Vamana, and the left side Phoenix stands.
Biggest difference. You've got an Ankh this time. Twig wasn't healing anywhere near the amount that ult is able to. So you dive that deep and you get the kill. They needed that around the FG, but at least they get it here.
I was surprised Netrioid took that Riptide. That sent him into Phoenix line. And Phoenix respawns on left. You've got 1 minute exactly with Fire Giant buff. If you're the Camelot Kings, there's a Primal Fury up. So you'll have like 20 seconds of Fire Giant buff left when CaptainTwig is left on the map. I think that was enough from the Bolts. I think that the map state remains the same, and we go into the next Fire Giant effectively even.
Yeah, I think Primal Fury is going to help things out. Again, gold lead is really what you're leaning on right now if you're the Kings, right? You've got to look at relic upgrades, or you've got a few that are up at the tier 3 mark on the side of the Kings, where there's still tier 2s on the other side, but also itemization, your ward coverage, things like that. 6 slots with upgraded starters for a few of the carries, the jungles, things like that. Support still trying to play catch up. BaRRA does not have a final item.
Look at this call. What a call from the Camelot Kings just to walk into the left side Phoenix. And the Bolts asleep at the wheel just a bit.
I don't think they don't back. There's no reason to back here.
Yeah, you might cancel it. Maybe you're assuming. Well, I guess what you're really guarding is the immediate rotation to the mid Phoenix.
Or if they went for a Titan play.
Or if they went for a Titan play. But Camelot Kings don't. And there's some of that macro call. What a call from the Kings.
Beautiful.
And that sends us into the next Fire Giant. Not even. Now suddenly the Bolts have a bit of a headache brewing on the left side of the map. You have Haddix with teleport. Big difference maker there. But that's a great play from the Camelot Kings to tilt the scales in their favor.
And that's it. Look, that's like psychology being applied into this game, because the Bolts are going to recognize in that moment, much like we were, you've only got a minute 20, minute 25 left on the FG after you get Twig back, and all the other things that have happened, can you really do anything with it? And if the Bolts are over there still defending or trying to push back, yes, but you know, because they're going to be thinking along the same lines, that, yeah, there's not much you can do with that amount of time, but they're going to go towards the right, they're going to try to set up, they're going to get ward coverage, they're going to try to put the vision down, and so that's just well played. I mean, worst case scenario for the Kings there, you see that they're at the Phoenix line, you just back off. Oh, well, we lose the Fire Giant buff. Who cares? Best case scenario is exactly what happened. I mean, you get to go over there, no defense. You walk in, you shred Phoenix with, what, 20 seconds left. And now you're still in a good position to be able to fight this next FG. In fact, a better position.
I guess LASBRA kills the minion waves faster, but can't teleport over. I mean, you've got Haddix here. Maybe you need the tankiness to contest the Fire Giant, but that's the call. And look at this. This is picture perfect from CaptainTwig, or is it? Because the backline of the Bolts has been able to push back the Vamana, and Colossal Fury is used defensively. So is River's Rebuke. Those were the two big ultimates we talked about. The Camelot Kings needing for engage, and they come up empty-handed this time.
I mean, you go ult for relic, relic for ult, things like that. Exactly what the Bolts need. Fire minions are going to be a problem here. And if the Bolts could have gotten one more person, Twig's going to be back by now, so you're not going to be able to leverage it. But if Twig backs away and you force either one more kill or you're able to force someone else back to the base on the Kings, you can move forward and burn that FG before them. But they still have Kraken, so this is going to be leaning in favor of the Kings.
Haddix. Oh, the ward gets cleared, and so Haddix has got to choose a different way to get into this fight. And the Olympus Bolts now realizing that may have been their chance. 125 seconds on the teleport.
Variety backed.
Variety did go backward, and Variety does not have teleport, and so the Bolts are going to commit to this Fire Giant, but they drop it. I don't know if they realize that Variety isn't here. If they stick on it, the Bolts may be able to pick this one up. The Camelot Kings in a 5 versus 4 for the moment. Awesome Jake left alone in the back. Netrioid plucked away. Stygian Torment used. That grabs some beats. Haddix taken down by the Kraken, but the Olympus Bolts get the Fire Giant, but what's the cost? For now, it's two of your team members, BaRRaCCuDDa, LASBRA, Ven, the last three on the map, but BaRRaCCuDDa will fall. LASBRA and Ven now, the one standing against the Camelot Kings, and the Camelot Kings have eyes for blood.
LASBRA's just trying to peel. He wants to keep Ven alive. He wants to pull him away from the base. He's successful, but it's going to cost him his life.
Mantle of Discord with the stun, and CaptainTwig with the double. The Camelot Kings have turned around game 2, and on to a game 3 we go at the top of the standings.
I mean, look, that is so well turned around. I think that it stems at the beginning a couple of good fights for the Kings that admittedly have some mistakes from the Bolts in them as well. Maybe presence where it doesn't need to be. And you know what? Take the gifts where you see them. Exactly what you need to do. They take the plays, they win those fights. But then after that, it's just brilliant map play. That Phoenix call into the FG, the way they bait it out, the fact that Twig lives, all these little moments just stack up, add up, and then you end up with a very good-looking win from the Kings, despite the fact that, what, 25 minutes, 26, 27 minutes of that were not good for them.
Man, that it's just simple individual picks, the turnarounds, the stabilization, and it's not unlike moments in Game 1. Game 1 was certainly more dominating by the Bolts in every facet, but like one pick turns into a sudden Fire Giant for the Camelot Kings, and then the really, Gore, I think the Phoenix call from the Kings right at the end of that first Fire Giant buff.
That was massive.
That changes the dynamic of this game completely. That's the difference between LASBRA and Haddix having to juggle the Fire minions on left, just being able to be there and team fight.
Yep.
And the Bolts kind of stick around on that enhanced Fire Giant a bit at the end of the game when Variety had to go back. I don't know, there are lots of chess piece moving types of moments there towards the end, but that's what you expect when you're fighting at the top of the standings. Bolts versus Camelot Kings, the game 3 we all wanted, coming up next.
If I could play one character for the rest of my SMITE career, Ullr, because he's just too fun. Like, there's so much playmaking potential. It's Ullr or Heim, but Ullr's in the meta more than Heim, so don't want to be stuck playing Heim in like a crit meta. That's not fun.
If I could play one god for the rest of my career, it'd probably be Ravana, just because he's fun.
The one god I'd play the rest of my career would be Thanatos, just because he's that fun, and I want him to work, but he never does.
I mean, I could say Yemoja maybe, but in a realistic world, I would say Fafnir is a cool character, so I say Fafnir.
It's close, but I think it's Neja. He is just so fun. He's got so much outplay, and I don't think he could ever get boring.
One god for the rest of my career, it'd be Ullr. Ullr is the most fun god in Smite right now, in my opinion. I would pick Ullr.
Fair enough.
explosive game number 2 nets the Camelot Kings a win and now ties up the set and brings us in towards game number 3. Again, a great start by the Olympus Bolts. They're able to peel a few thousand gold up ahead of the Camelot Kings, kind of take control of the early game, but unlike in game number 1 where that 2,000 then spirals to 3, 4, and then 14,000 plus onward, lead never really got too far ahead for the Olympus Bolts, and the Camelot Kings are able to play around the map a little bit better, get some of their objectives under their belts. CaptainTwig able to find quite a few multi-kills during that game. I believe 2 or 3 different instances of finding double kills. And just the team fight prowess around this Yemoja out of Genetics really able to bring the Camelot Kings back in this game, Miff.
Yeah, I mean, Genetics just really stepped up this time around, and the Yemoja has been taken away from Genetics in the past for exactly this reason. Some of those ultimates really just separate the team fights. I wonder how many clips we're going to see from the Camelot Kings that are off the back of Genetics ultimates, right? I mean, sure, CaptainTwig credit for the kill here, but if you were paying attention at the very offset, it was because Genetics had set it up very, very well with the wall. But you are right to say that it was a good start from the Olympus Bolts, and maybe even an understatement. I had essentially written off this game. They get the Phoenix, things are looking good, the siege is starting off right, but the Camelot Kings keep their head on straight, and the dive potential was certainly there. It felt like at times the Olympus Bolts were really struggling in closing gap to priority targets. Specifically, when Haddix got in, he got on to BigManTingz, and BigManTingz kind of just survives those scenarios with his style of build. Even LASBRA, to a certain extent, very survivable on this Ravana pick, but was hesitant to initiate because of the damage output of the Camelot Kings. Whereas the Kings front line, I felt like just had zero respect. I mean, Variety was in there regardless of who was standing between him and his goal. CaptainTwig starts to go a little bit more bruiser towards the latter half of his build, and once he got there, my man was just going in and was not concerned at all about who's in front of him. The Camelot Kings, it took them a little while to get there, but once they got to that 5-on-5 engagement around the Fire Giant the second time around, it looked a lot better.
And that's really where CaptainTwig in that pregame interview was talking about, is once these team fights can get through, once you get to these 25, 30-minute stages, as long as these guys are even at the very least, are not very far behind. He talks about how he and his team know exactly how to play their role in every single one of those team fights. You see in that last little clip there, the backliners staying as far back as they need to, only really going in whenever it's absolutely necessary, such as when Haddix jumps in. And I think that last little fight around the Fire Giant was really kind of, obviously it was technically the final nail in the coffin for that game of the Bolts, but they were holding on to that enhanced Fire Giant for so long. Haddix took probably 3/4 of his health just tanking up the damage from it, that when the Kraken finally does come through, it's not the Kraken that deals the final blow, it's the Whirlpool and the residual fire ring damage that he'd been sitting in that entire time.
It's the Whirlpool into the second Whirlpool and the third Whirlpool. Yeah. That build is just so annoying for BigManTingz. And we had been talking about it in the previous set with the Camelot Kings. Are you banning Poseidon? Is BigManTingz capable of playing other picks at this level while he's across the pond? The answer was yes, because they did ban Poseidon. And, well, if that's the case, I suppose just let him have it. The Olympus Bolts, Khepri, Yemoja, and Chernobog, the Kings, take out the Morrigan and Nox. Could try and toss another dedicated ban over towards that support role. I'm thinking you might want to target a Ymir selection. Both the Bolts, Awesome Jake 408, and Genetics, very capable of playing that pick, but you're not really worried about it in first slot overall. The Kings are taking their time. They're trying to think it through.
It's real curious to me. You know, in game 1, Bolts had first pick, and they banned away these same 3 gods. In game number 2, the Bolts were second pick, and they left the Yemoja open, which is curious to me that if you're the first pick and you're willing to ban it away from yourself because you don't want to grab it first, but then you're the second and you're just willing to give it over to the enemy team, it just seems like a real kind of strange logic to me in the Bolts in that regard, but they're at least going to make amends, not let it go through in game number 3, and then the AMC will be the final ban. The Camelot Kings are tired of Venenu having that pick.
Honestly, I could see it a little bit, right? Because Yemoja is the most double-edged sword god in the game. Like, for example, and it's a poor example because it's not competitive Smite, but for all you ranked players in the chat right now, Silver, Gold, Plat, Diamond, even Masters, I think there are probably 20 or 30 good Yemoja players on the planet. So if you leave it up, you could just heat check them. Hey, you still got this? You still capable of playing the highest execution character in the game? You still lining those ultimates up? How are your Riptides looking?
Sure, I mean, that's,
right?
that's good ranked mentality, but...
That's Genetics, you're right.
But that's Genetics on the other side.
It is quite literally Genetics.
You look at genetics, Jake, Wrong You, I could pronounce your name just about anybody in the SPL at this point.
The
so
8 of the SPL
8
players.
support SPL players, and even a few of the SCC players in that same regard, like players like Quig. I'm not giving Yemoja over to any of those players in a high-level game like this, especially with the performance genetics has been having on the last couple of times he was allowed to have that pick. But regardless, the bands that go through and now into the picks, Osiris for the Bolts, and they worked out very well for them in game number 1, Xingqian and Chiron. So Netrioid gonna try and reprise the Horseman back over in the duo lane.
That is an early Xingqian selection. Now the Bolts, if they so choose, can really start to prioritize CC immunity in their god picks. Things like the Ravana, very good into Xingqian, so Ravana strong in multiple roles right now. Could be a selection for the Olympus Bolts. I'm keeping my eyes on it. I mean, that is such a curious selection so early. Maybe you're worried about the presence of Osiris's auto attacks. You know there's at least going to be one hunter on the Olympus Bolt, so Ferocious Roar should find some value in that regard. Jingwei, a great selection into Xingqian. Whirlwind of Rage and Steel, toss him towards the team, immediately dash out, or if you don't want to get picked up whatsoever, Airstrike on reaction. So the Olympus Bolts get a couple of picks that really will contend well with the initiation of Xingqian. Even Cthulhu can just go into that descent into madness and immediately start disrupting the fight.
Now it goes back over to the Camelot Kings. The Xingqian maybe acting as kind of a pseudo third or fourth ban, I guess in this case, up against Awesome Jake. It's a pick that he has really loved to play. He's been running the Chronos Pendant Xingqian
That's a good point.
multiple times. But he has been flexing over to the Sobek and the Terra a few times since those Xingqian bans have become more frequent over to him. So we'll see where Awesome Jake elects to go. We'll see if the Kings decide to put a few more bans in that support role. For now, they'll go ahead and lock into God for CaptainTwig, Nemesis, who has still been teetering at the top end of the meta for the junglers.
Man, you've kind of talked me into the bans for the Kings. Like, I wouldn't mind seeing a Terra ban right now. That would go pretty well for the Camelot Kings, trying to remove some of that pressure that Awesome Jake could establish for the Bolts. Instead, Hell banned out, a pick that Ven's been going towards pretty consistently recently, and a one that is very strong in a Xingqian. Telegraphed CC that takes a little while to channel. Cleanse gets tossed out. All of a sudden, Xingqian is legitimately worthless with his ultimate, so good ban from the Camelot Kings. Yeah, between the Terra and the Sobek, I'm kind of rooting for a Terra ban from the Kings. I think you hit the nail on the head.
We'll see if the Kings decide to go with that. Olympus Bolts taking a little bit of time on their bans to see what they need to go for. Do they target BigManTingz? The answer with the first ban is yes. In the last 3 or 4 Poseidon games that BigManTingz has been allowed to play that, it has been wins. And when I say that like 3, 3, and 5 is the worst of the KDAs that he has had on that pick, that's saying a lot for this player. So BigManTingz will have to find something else to go towards in the mid. I think ever since he has gone back home, is playing on ping, the only other god that he's really had to kind of go over towards has been this Neat. So maybe see if that could be an option there. The King's still going to target out in the support role, not going to be Terra. It'll be an E-set ban, which does act as a double ban, one over towards Venenu and over towards Jake, but more often than not, that has been going to Jake's hand.
It's been a little while since we've seen a whole lot of E-set in support. It seems like the SPL as a whole has put a little bit more respect on the damage output that E-set can bring with scaling, with how late these games are going, Warlock Staff, Book of Thoth, having Circle Protection as just that guaranteed secure on your objective has been serving these teams very, very well. Neath rounds out the bans for the Olympus Bolts. So that's the two. That's the two we've seen from BigManTingz. What else does he go towards?
There was a Nuwa on there at one point.
Oh, yeah, but Nuwa doesn't count. That's like negative skill shots.
True, you press 4, you get damage.
And he hits 5 every time. This guy's crazy.
It's insane. Unless somebody's dead, then he can't. Then he hits their corpse, but that doesn't count as player damage at that point.
No, you're right. So maybe the Nuwa, I don't know. I don't love Nuwa into this draft from the Olympus Bolts. I mean, Nuwa's okay into Osiris. You're at least forcing Lord of the Afterlife to avoid the stun from the clay minions, so you're able to kind of strip away the tether pretty easily. Instead, Merlin is the selection for the Kings. Not an easy god to play on ping, I'll tell you that one right off rip. He's got a lot of consistent skill shots. The ice stance primary ability, very difficult to line up, single line ability, but does bring your team composition a good deal of objective burn. Very good in base defense situations. I don't think there's a single mage in the game that I would rather have to defend a Phoenix or defend a tower than Merlin. His space control and DPS in those situations, those scenarios, very, very strong. And even on Siege, as long as you've got some decent CC lockdown, Merlin should be able to line up those abilities with relative ease, and Xingqian is exactly that. So I talked myself into that one too. All right. Let's see it. BigManTingz on the Merlin.
Talking yourself into a lot of these picks and a lot of these bans out here. Well, for Merlin, it seems to be that is kind of one of the go-to gods for a lot of these mid laners when most of their comfort picks are taken away or when they're kind of put in weird situations and whatnot. It seems that Merlin has always been kind of a fallback out. I think of over players like BennyQ, whenever a lot of his kind of weirder picks aren't working out and he just needs to go something a little bit more standard, he'll go over to a pick similar to this. So we'll see how BigManTingz can play on this one. The Olympus Bolts will go for a Ymir in the support role. That's something that Genetics has been playing a lot of, something that Awesome Jake was also very proficient on last time around. And then the Yu Huang, which has been seeing a lot of popularity ever since he was allowed to be played in SPL. He's been seeing a lot of games and is sitting right around that 50% mark on the win rate.
Yeah, I was concerned for the Olympus Bolts' initiation prowess going into those bottom 2 picks, and then that concern was immediately alleviated. Ymir's got decent matchup into both Chiron and Nemesis. Both don't really have any ways inherently built into the kit to deal with that wall. So Phantom Shell has to become a topic of conversation. Otherwise, Merlin and Jing won't struggle too much. And then Yu Huang also acting as a pseudo-initiator for your team with the Dueling Dragons. Really should set up a couple of these fights. Horus locked in.
Xingqian solo?
I mean, we've seen Horus solo as well. But that's usually Haddix on the other side.
If there's one person on the Kings roster I'd imagine is playing Horus, it's got to be Genetic. I mean, this guy literally got a god. This guy got a god nerfed the very next week with his play.
Yeah, he is really good at it. It depends on the laning phase, right? Like, how strong is Horus into Jingwei? Not the strongest. How strong is he into Ymir? Actually very good. Ymir is so immobile. The lockdown of Fracture into the knockup. Pretty strong from Horus. You've got an aggressive lane with Chiron. Jing has similar ability to lock down, though. So how's that solo lane matchup look? Do you want the Guardian v Guardian Jing up against Cthulhu? Me personally, no. I don't like watching Guardians fight ever, but it's all about pressure. Curious, there's a whole lot of flex potential there. I could come up with arguments for either one in either role. There are strengths and weaknesses to both. It's just about which one do you want to get involved in your game earlier, and when you figure out who that one is, you throw them into support.
Well, then maybe we take a look at maybe the jungle mid kind of matchup there, the Nemesis Merlin for the side of the Camelot Kings. Maybe a little bit slower to go as far as that is concerned up against what the Bolts have been able to draft with the Yu Huang and the Osiris, 2 gods that can definitely get some very early kill pressure. So we've seen one too many times, and I'm just going to say it, we have seen too many times in the SPL where first bloods are happening in mid lane against the Yu Huang. If you are the Camelot Kings, if I'm CaptainTwig, I'm going there for the level 1, level 2, help clear that wave. I'm not trying to fight in that mid lane whatsoever for the first few levels.
Better man than me. I'm not even going to that first mid wave. I'd start at red buff, go to my speed, clear out the camps. Maybe I'm cringe ganking solo. Maybe I'm going the opposite side to clear out a green buff once it respawns. But walking into Osiris, which with presumably Mannequin Scepter, and a Yu Huang with Cultivate Dao at like level 2, just is the opposite of fun. I could come up with numerous torture devices that I'd rather participate and partake in than actually engaging in that mid lane for at least the first couple of levels.
Yeah, and that's where, you know, we've talked a lot about where Yu Huang, it definitely does shine those first 3 to 4 levels of the game. Meanwhile, then you have about 10 or so levels where you don't really have to deal with him as much. So maybe CaptainTwig puts a little bit of pressure on the mid, maybe just ignores it entirely and then goes over towards one of these solos or over towards this support role. So if that's the case, I mean, do you send the Nemesis over to deal with the Cthulhu, or do you send the Nemesis to try and deal with this Ymir potentially?
Both are good options, but the answer that is most often come up with is just getting on top of that Cthulhu. Let's control blue buff and make sure he's getting a slow start.
Well, who's going to take Game 3? Who's going to take the #1 seed in this phase of the SPL? Will it be the Bolts? Will it be the Kings? We'll take it into Game number 3 to find out.
Just seems fitting that the Bolts and the Kings go all 3. Looked like it might have been 2 for about 25 minutes of game number 2. The Olympus Bolts very much in control. Camelot Kings by their time. And eventually that team comp was able to capitalize on some good early pressure. And so into a game number 3 we go, Gore, between the Bolts and the Camelot Kings. And Doug has been with us the whole time through all of the ups and downs, the peaks and the valleys, the quacking sounds and the bubble bombs. And it all comes to a head here in what should be a very exciting Game 3, and really a Game 3 where we see, I think, our first real big dynamic shift. LASBRA goes back to this Osiris Twig on another new jungler, gets the Nemesis. BigManTingz on something a bit different, but so is Venenu. Big dynamic shifts here in Game 3.
Now, honestly, though, it is the dynamic that I like more is the Bolts, right? A little bit more power, I think, early on between LASBRA and Vin. Granted, I think mid lane, as Mifflin was kind of highlighting, as we said over the last couple of weeks, might hit a little bit more of a lull. LASBRA did not earlier when he was playing this Osiris, so I expect a lot from that. Haddix had a phenomenal game on the Cthulhu. Dual lane will be interesting, because I like Genetics Horus. I feel like it is one of my favorite Horuses to watch. So I think that one's going to just be fun. I think early on, the Bolts should be able to get themselves to a good lead, which they did in Game 1, and they did in Game 2. Although Game 2, definitely a lot more fumbles, good plays from the Kings that help pull things back. This time around, you know, Merlin can be a little back and forth. I'm going to watch BigManTingz with a critical eye just because of that and whether or not that's going to be able to hit. But I think Variety's on a good god. I think Netrioid's on a good god. This one, I mean, much like their matchup, I was actually, I asked Zayden to pull this up because I've been trying to compile a like set versus set, game versus game for all of the teams in the SBL, so the franchises that we've seen so far. Virtually equal in
Really?
these two. Yeah, I think it's like 2 sets to 3. They haven't really played too many times. The Bolts and the Kings last year didn't have a lot of matchups. This year have only had the one up until now. And then game-wise, it was like right next to each other as well. This is one of the most even matchups that we have in SMITE.
Does feel like a regular season. It's not like the storied postseason matchup of like Bolts versus Dragons, right? Bolts and Leviathans have matched up together. Who are the Kings like postseason? I'm trying to even think.
That's the, you know, I think, who was it? It was Layers? Maybe someone on the Titans had tweeted out, because when they had lost to him, they said, we lost to the Kings of regular season. And that's the implications that the Kings are only ever really here during, you know, your Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3, but not your Masters or your Worlds runs.
Yeah, that's a good point. Kings and Titans, I do think, have some good postseason matchups. But a regular season matchup that's very exciting between the Bolts and the Kings, of course. Remember, at the end of this weekend, officially halfway through Phase 2, 1 round robin will be completed after our 2nd set today and then 3 sets tomorrow. And so plenty of SMITE still to be played, but not surprising that only a game separates, in what will eventually be 2 games for one of these 2 teams, separate the top teams from the other like 5 in the top 6. And so the SPL at a very competitive point. And the Olympus Bolts and the Camelot Kings in this set have just proven that. Now, the solo lane might not be all that exciting, might not be as riveting as this matchup details between a Cthulhu and a Xing Chen Gore. My goodness, what a lane that's going to be for both Haddix and Variety. A lot of farming. And both have the ability to get out of jungle pressure pretty early. But I suppose both of these junglers have the ability to jump in, make life interesting. CaptainTwig with the retribution onto Haddix maybe could make some waves. And if not during the laning phase, at least later on in the game.
Yeah, I sincerely doubt this is going to be the most enticing lane, whether it's for the junglers or just in general. I think it's going to be a lot of slap boxing, a lot of, oh my god, I'm a Guardian. Hey, you're a Guardian too. You know, like just looking at each other, staring each other down, clearing. But like you said, team fight-wise, the rotations that they're going to be able to bring, that's where things, I think, get a little more interesting. We saw earlier with the Cthulhu-Osiris combo from the Bolts in game number 1, where they got aggressive onto a blue buff, were able to find a good knock-up, force Twig back under, I believe, the tier 2, and kill Variety before they were able to get under the tier 1. But it was up against the King Arthur there, so maybe not as clean as it could be up against something like a Xing Chen. You mentioned, you know, really good disengage there. And so, I don't know. I don't expect a lot out of that lane until they rotate in. When they rotate in, they're going to be the kings of the team fights. Like, they're the ones who dictate almost everything that happens from that point forward.
Right. Yeah, and there was some speculation on whether or not it would end up being Horus solo lane, Xing Chen support. I think Myth brings up a good point with that, in that you want this Horus to be able to get active a bit earlier on in the game. To the Sky is such a unique ultimate in the game, drop shipping teammates, or even yourself. And Genetics, of course, near the top of his class as far as Horus specifically goes. But that potentially makes life difficult for Jake. I mean, just the mobility of Genetics outclasses that of Ymir just a bit. And so come level 5, level 6 rotation time for these 2 supports, I'm really going to have to keep my eyes on, I mean, Genetics, yes, to just see where in the world Horus is and what plays potentially making happen. But also Jake, because he just kind of got to waddle himself around and try to keep pace with this Horus.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the interesting portion for a Ymir because Miff had mentioned it a little bit on the desk, and you touch on it here, but like the capabilities for a Horus to slow down a Ymir, keep up with the Ymir. I mean, Ymir's like all of his abilities are very slow and telegraphed. All of his movement very slow and telegraphed. You've got a lot of interrupts. You've got a good knock-up in the right position because of how close range that is. That can disable a freeze for a little bit. Or even if you get frozen, you've got a better stun that shreds prots. Admittedly, only single target, which is going to be the big difference maker there. But when you're going up against the Ymir, especially early on, that should open the door for your team to be able to find a kill. With someone like a Chiron behind you, if Jake is caught out of position by that Horus, it's going to be a very easy kill for the Kings.
So I do look towards mid. Obviously, that's where the supports would go for now, but have seen early pressure around a Yu Huang. There's been a lot of Warlock staff, but Book of Thoth today, Gorge, just started to take over. Think back to the Baba Yaga build for BigManTingz. That was Book of Thoth first. Get that stacking up. Venenu's going to do the same here. I'm trying to think of how much, if at all, we've seen Warlock staff today, whether it's solo laners or over in mid. Haven't seen much, and Book of Thoth has really been prioritized, so still sticking in that stacking tree, but just getting your value in a slightly different fashion.
I think it's an interesting conversation to be had too, because talking to Mifflin about it, I know that Warlock staff is, I think Warlock staff is favorable with or without stacks, right? Like, or let me rephrase that. Warlock staff no stacks better than Book of Thoth no stacks, just blanket like that. It's got good numbers on it, really feels really solid. Once they get stacked up, I think that swaps. I think I prefer an evolved Book of Thoth a little more than I care about like the Warlock staff with its stacks. And so you get a lot more bang for your buck stacking this up a little bit earlier. I think if you wanted to, you could even slot in a Warlock staff really late in your build, not stressing too much about the stacks themselves, just because again the base stats are really good. Whereas this one, while right now, especially early on, you're maybe not going to see anything crazy or anything pop off from Vin, I think that the evolved power, the mana you're going to get from this, the capabilities specifically of a Yu Huang to throw out those abilities incredibly quickly, I mean very low cooldown on some of those, I think it's going to give us a very, very strong mid laner late game for the Bolts.
Yeah, I think so as well. BigManTingz will also scale up pretty nicely. I mean, a Merlin.
Yeah, Merlin's never bad.
No. I mean, Merlin's literally a mage, right? When you are... Is Merlin the most magey mage in the game? Yu Huang is kind of, I mean, sort of close, I guess, but like, even Merlin's lore is just being a mage, right? And so when you are the class, I guess you always have to be a certain level of good. And Merlin, I guess itemization-wise, a couple years ago wasn't in the best spot, but look later in the game, variety of different builds work with him. Doom Orb start is not something I've often seen on a Merlin, but hey, why not? Variety sends out the Whirlwind of Rage and Steel. Haddix won't be caught out by that. But again, with how slow-paced the solo lane is, I don't think that'll end up mattering too much. Blue buff up. With a Cthulhu, you'd love to facilitate some of that pressure, but LASBRA a bit more focused on farming up. Didn't start Stone Cutting Sword this time like he did in game 1. Instead, Golden Blade into what likely is a Stone Cutting Sword. Just trying to keep pace with CaptainTwig.
Now, honestly, I think that that's kind of where you have to be at. I think Osiris can get a little more hands-on if they wanted to, but you don't have to, right? I mean, farming up, that's something that Twig does normally and does well. And so I'm not too surprised to see him slow roll it. I think that this is a comp, actually right now, a pace of game that is favorable for the Kings. I think the way that they are playing this is the way they like to play. It's not a lot of action, there's not a lot of pressure, it's just farming up, playing, focusing on the macro, getting neutral objectives right now, and if you're wondering, oh man, what do you mean Gold Fury's not going to go down? But like your mid camps, right? Trying to take those, being able to get some of the Harpies that are split all the way across the map. Any small source of experience going your way feels pretty good. Still has amassed, what, 500 gold or something like that for the Bolts, so it's not like crazy great for the Kings, but it's not anywhere near as bad as it's been the last 2 games. They've managed to keep themselves much closer to where the Bolts are, and it's a pace that they are very comfortable with, because at this rate, you're so even, you're so close, that by the time you get to the 18-minute mark and the first maybe full fight breaks out, you feel great about it. You've got good scaling, you've got good gods, Nemesis works well there, Variety will be able to join the fights. We were just talking about this Merlin, but I think he is going to be a lot more capable and Horus will be tankier, right? We love Horus early game because it has the fighting status of a warrior, right? You start out very much there. But your late game scaling is the same as a Guardian. So, you know, level 9, you're kind of in this weird middle ground where you're sort of tanky, kind of damagey, but not really good at either.
Right.
And about 4 levels, he's going to be just tanky enough that it's really going to allow him to fully flex into that role.
I don't know what genetics goes with for a second item here. I would say Thebes, but you can't get 2. In theory, maybe you should, because you got 2 hands. You can wear a gauntlet on both.
Well, see, but it's only a right hand gauntlet. It's like trying to, you know what I mean? Like, you can't wear the infinity gauntlet on your right hand and your left hand. It only has one thumb.
You can, but the fingers would not flex.
They just won't bend.
Right,
You got to do like that weird thing. Your fingers are kind of pulled back.
In which case, you wouldn't be able to snap your fingers, so
Yeah.
you couldn't make anything happen, which is why only one infinity gauntlet made sense.
You could probably make another one if you wanted to.
No, so he made his
But there's
hands
not,
like
like-
cement blocks or whatever. You remember?
Yeah, well, I was going to say there's just not enough, at least in this context, not enough stones for that. We need a left-handed, the thing I'm learning, we need a left-handed glove for the supports.
And me, I'm a lefty. And I think lefties...
Are you a lefty?
I am a lefty.
I would have called you ambidextrous.
No, I mean, like with lacrosse, yes. I bowl with my left hand.
How do you swing in golf?
Left hand.
Oh, okay.
I am like 90% lefty, and then every once in a while I'll do something righty. But none of the things I've listed. As some action finally bursts out, and it's awesome, Jake. Just CC'd to hell and back. And that'll be first blood to the Camelot Kings. The stun in from Genetics, the knock-up, the pull-in from Tings, the ultimate from Twig, the slow. Just too much for Ymir to deal with.
I mean, that's just going to be textbook. A stun that strips prots, an ult that strips prots from Twig, and so 2 things that immediately make Jake just squishier, and then tons of burn damage that you're going to be able to get from Tings. I mean, single target, you know, shredding of a tanky anything, whether it's an objective or in this case a person. Merlin loves to do that, and so I love seeing that because I think that is the essential 3v3 that you're going to get from the Kings. If they can find any scenario to do that play, they'll do it every time because it is so easy. Granted, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer for Twig to get his ult back, but up against Ven, you don't really need the Nim Shred as much. If Slice and Dice is going to get a good chunk, you're going to get a lot of damage from Tings as well, so it's all going to be easily compiled. Maybe less of a CC chain, but still incredibly deadly.
Yep, Variety maybe a kill back, but LASBRA's just been rotating over to get the Totem of Coups taken down. And down it goes. And so the coup counter, 8-2 for the Olympus Bolts. Things I didn't think I'd be talking about in Game 3.
The coup counter?
The coup counter. But here we are. And that gives you a good idea generally of the way the pressure has been going in that lane.
How many? That's been up there for a while, and we should just change it to be the counter of coup. Because that's what it does. It counts the coups.
That has maybe been the 3rd time I've ever referenced that on cast. In 3 years of casting Smite, I've maybe talked about the coup counter 2 other times. And they were probably very early on in my casting career when I was like super nervous and had
trying to
nothing
figure out
else
what
to talk
to
about.
grasp onto.
Like, my God, there's data on the screen somewhere.
You got to talk about coup diff, Dave. Because in games like this, coup diff actually matters, right? Like, if you look at this, that's where, you know, a lot of, like, the first blood bounty doesn't impact the Kings as heavily because the Bolts have been able to get more coups and a little bit more team-wide gold. When you look at, like, the sustainability, survivability so far we've seen in lane, that's all coming from Haddix, baby.
It sure is. Haddix hoping for the 9th coup of the game for the Olympus Bolts, but CaptainTwig will bring that score right back to even. Notch one up for the Camelot Kings. The coup counter goes to 8-3. And if you're the Camelot Kings, you are just thrilled with the way the scoreboard has changed over the last couple of seconds. You are going to be happy the Pyromancer may be getting taken down. LASBRA and Ven close by. And the Kings will end up backing away. Now, Game 3s at this type of pace score, not unheard of, especially with how chaotic at times Game 1 and 2 were. When you get 2 teams like this who do like to play a bit more calculated and methodical, Kings maybe more so than the Bolts, Game 3s do tend to let off the gas a bit. You know, you like to make sure you're rolling through the early game to mid game, not making many mistakes. And then over the next couple of minutes, when those first objectives become viable, maybe we'll see the pace pick up.
Well, and they got to be playing it slow if you're the Bolts. Vin's trying to buy the whole damn library right now. I mean, he's got 2 books. A 3rd book soon on the way, man. It's going to be interesting to see when he joins these fights because it should be a good amount of damage and control.
Yeah, reading takes forever, and Ven showing us why. Genetics trapped behind the wall. That'll give the first kill of the fight to the Bolts and the first kill of the game. A push back in from Ven onto Variety. Makes life uncomfortable for the Xingqian. And Haddix is simply running down the Kings. And how about the walls from Awesome Jake to trap 2 of the Camelot Kings in the small jungle corridor, but CaptainTwig has found the wraparound. So right now the Bolts have that 1 kill advantage, and it looks like that's how it'll stop.
I mean, dual lane for jungle, it's a trade that I would have expected to see on the left side of the map. But well played by the Bolts. And like you said, it's just a good wall from Jake that locks him in. I think there's a good disengage potential from the Kings. They kill off Genetics, and that's going to happen no matter what. But the chase down, the kill onto Netrioid, and the continuation of that fight from the Bolts is bought and afforded by that wall from Jake. And that gets you 2 kills. Again, for 1, losing LASBRA is not the best thing in the world, but look how many relics you burn. Beads, beads, shell, shell, and then, of course, the blink as well from Twig. So that's 5 relics that are going to be gone from the Kings, and you burn 2 pairs of beads, admittedly, and a sprint if you're the Bolts there. So not anywhere near as heavy of an investment from them. Ult economies are going to be able to balance out no problem. Then you get a Pyromancer to boot. You're feeling really good, not only about what you just got, but now the position you're in, because it's the first time that it's felt like something of a lead for either of these squads.
Okay, I was about to ask if Jing just hates crit nowadays, because another build started off without crit in the first 3 items. Because recently we've seen like Icavale into one of Aussie XE Kinsides and then Wind Demon after that, which still feels kind of slow on crit. But like Devos into XE into Kinsides and then into Wind Demon. I mean, like, I'm not going to pretend to know more about Jing than BaRRaCCuDDa. The guy, he's played the most, right?
The guy might have more hours on BaRRaCCuDDa or on Jing than I might have on any god in the game combined. Like,
yes, I think
the support class. I've been playing support only for like 4 years, maybe a little longer than that. I think BaRRa has played more individual Jing than I've played all support.
I wonder if that's just BaRRa saying, well, early in the game, I want to be able to shred through genetics and variety a bit better.
Yeah.
And then later on, when I'm scrapping with Tings and Netrioid in actual team fights and CaptainTwig, that's when I'm going to need a bit more crit. And depending on what that final item is, could go something like a Venom Deathbringer, and it'll be a real nice build.
Between the XE and the Chins, not just for BaRRa, but the XE plus the Chins for LASBRA, is going to end up combining, because that's going to help LASBRA deal a little bit more damage to someone like Variety Genetics overall. So the 2 of them in tandem will be able to deal with the frontline dive pretty well as potentially just killing off Twig a little bit quicker. Twig has been deep to dive, at least in the last game. Nemesis might not do it as much, but you're still going to be facing that. And I think in those matchups where BaRRa can get a stray auto or 2 or 3, ideally, onto a target that LASBRA's trying to burn down, it's going to make it a lot easier for the Bolts to burn through whoever it is.
Yep. Well, it's only right for Ven would be to buy Book of the Dead now, right? I mean, that's the last.
That's the last of the library.
It's the last of the library. It's a small library.
That's a very small library.
However,
the gods weren't known for reading a whole ton.
The Gold Fury, known for going down a good bit, and the Gold Fury to the Camelot Kings, and that is just the Bolts a bit slow on their rotation in the Kings. Second perfect on their pull. Just as the Bolts around that corner, the Camelot Kings finish off the objective, and that's the difference between an even game and a 1,000 gold lead for the Kings. Something the Bolts won't be super worried about. Of course, you'd love to grab the first Gold Fury of the game.
What has Tings been doing farm-wise? He's 3 levels up on Vin. I didn't even glance at it.
It's easy to not notice those things when like nothing,
when
not
there's
much
no
has been
like, crazy
happening,
fights.
Right?
But just a silent 3 levels. Like the gold jumped up, and I was like, they've just been farming better. Like the Kings have been farming better the entire time, because that was an even game prior to that Fury, despite the Pyromancer for the Bolts. And so not only does it get a lead for the Kings, but they were amassing it anyway, and a lot of that has been in that mid lane. It was 3 levels, maybe it's closer to 2.5, but you've got a significant lead just from Tings, and that's good farm practices for them.
Genetics will take a bit of damage from Ven. Ven takes a lot of damage from BigManTingz. Ting's build right now, very bursty, and some shred on the back end as well. Look at that, Obshard and Soul Reaver is the last two, and then Soul Gem just prior to that. Good CDR pairing with the Sands of Time. I really like the way Ting's build is moving forward here as well. You're going to need not only some of that damage for Ben, but Laz, Haddix, and Jake take a bit of extra damage. Haven't seen much over in the Soul lane outside of this style of grouping from both teams. It looks like not much will happen as BaRRaCCuDDa, for some reason, is all. You're not level 20 yet, Barra. Hunters aren't allowed to get out of duo lane for one more level. Get yourself back over there. Get up to level 20. As Barra finishes his Wind Demon, moving into a bit more crit later on. On the flip side, Gore Netrioid has hit some big power spikes.
Yeah, that's the thing I'm a little more worried about. It was around this point of the game, well, I guess about 6 more minutes last game, where we started to see tons more damage from Netrioid.
Haddix takes the Retribution, but a wall up from Awesome Jake slows down the initiation from the Kings. And so Twig has been very clear with where he wants his ultimates to go. Just hasn't quite killed off Haddix just yet. Hasn't had Netrioid in the fights. Ting's shred hasn't hit the Cthulhu on the front line yet. BaRRaCCuDDa does rotate over here to right. I don't know if we'll fight over a Pyro. It's burning way too quickly for the Bolts to really have much to say about it.
Yeah, they didn't get a choice as to whether or not they wanted to fight over the Pyro.
And with no Fury up on left, it'll be a clean Pyro, clean objective to the Camelot Kings, who pull an objective, pull a 2K gold lead.
This is again, if you're a Kings fan, you should know this, that it is just the ideal pace of them, right? 4 kills, 22 minutes in, but they've been able to ride the lightning. Well, maybe not, because that's the Bolts thing. They've been able to ride the power curve.
Well, unless that's a good thing, like if it's a good thing for the Kings to be riding the lightning.
I don't want to get into the implications of what that can mean with the Bolts being like the lightning in this case. And I don't think there's a line, we're like supposed to be PG-13, and I definitely think that
no, it's the
discussion,
saying, right? It's purely the saying.
Yeah,
it's
but
like,
the implications go beyond.
Yeah, well, look, that's not. I can't decide what Twitch chat thinks about it.
And apparently, what I think about it, because that's where my mind went.
Yeah, Gordon, I don't know what you're talking about, to be honest with you. The Bolts do pull out the Fire Giant. The Camelot Kings are close by, and Variety will allow us to take a quick, deep breath prior to what could be first big fight of the game that we've seen a couple 2v2 trade or one for one for two style of trades up to this point in this game. Haven't seen the full-on 5v5 yet.
No.
It feels like that's what we're brewing towards. Couple, I think, interesting notes to look forward to. And when you ever got a Cthulhu in your game, you're always wondering, where's the shred? How does it happen? You got a Nemesis on the other side. You've got Netrioid, who's built some health shred with the ability-based build a bit later on in the Chiron build. And so I think I look towards Haddix. How is he going to be able to control the front line and stay alive? And I think that dynamic for the Bolts will be a lot of fun to watch around this next episode.
Yeah, it's how well Haddix stays alive, the healing that is going to be there. Maybe not a ton, but you still have a little bit on the side of the Kings that can help them if they back off a little. But you also have Prot Shred on the Kings, not just in the Nemesis. You have it in the Horus as well, and that's going to be very helpful, not just for the Cthulhu, but for the Ymir.
Yep.
Walls, though, from Jake. So far this game, they've been on the money. They've been really solid in either protecting teammates or stopping the Kings from being able to get aggressive. So it's this juggle of whether the initiation and the burn from the Kings will be there, which you've got a Merlin. Burn is like ready for you.
It's one of the 3 things he does.
Of course. You know what? The ice, surprisingly, it's cold enough, it does burn.
In a way, yeah.
In a way. And so, you're getting a lot of good damage, I think, from him. A lot of combo capabilities on their side. That a 5v5 makes things even more interesting, right? Around the Fire Giant, you have not great secure really on either squad. Maybe I guess Ymir ult comes to my mind as something.
Man, if
use,
that's
but,
the secure we've
that's
got.
I'm not hanging my hat on that one.
Because I think secure and steal are potentially 2 different things as we get back into game number 3. Between
I'm not
the
trying
Kings
to
and the
steal
Bolts.
with a Ymir ult.
Right.
But I might secure with a Ymir.
Well, I think it's a Venn diagram. I think.
No, he's playing Yu Huang.
Goodness. I got you with a really bad one the other day. I forgot what it was, but
we were doing the
owed me
Ymir and mid lane variety. It was a joke.
You said Ymiriad, because some people pronounce Ymir as Ymir, which is actually maybe the correct way of pronouncing it, Ymir. And so when you said Ymiriad, I was proud of that one. I think all steals are not. What were we saying? Steal versus secure.
All steals lead to Rome.
Something like that. I was trying to bring up Netrioid and the Centaurus as a potential way of stealing. Like, it's not.
Yes, it's a better
not a big
steal.
objective, secure style of ability where you get this big amount of burst, but steal abilities are sort of longer
you're
range.
super long, far away.
Got a decent amount of damage that are able to roll out. Those types of things. So dash away from BaRRA. There's a bit of tech that you can look forward to this game. Whirlwind of Rage and Steel dashed out of by BaRRaCCuDDa. On the flip side, BaRRA not happy to lose 3/4 of his health to a Centaurus, and then the damage proc from Netrioid on the other end. Camelot Kings knocked down the tier 1 tower on the right side of the map. Olympus Bolts fall a bit further behind in the gold department.
This is, and the way I would describe the Kings, again, ideal type of game for them. This is like
Moody
watching.
villain. Oh,
well,
right.
it's the ocean to me, right? Because it is something that is just happening at the Bolts. Gold, the farm, everything is a little bit better. And if you try to stand up to them, they are going to be an incredibly strong force that they can knock you down. I think the Bolts still have a lot of capabilities, but you're slowly watching, map play overall that has just made things better for the Kings. There's a single tower down, and look at the lead they've managed to amass. Like, those charts are so heavily in their territory because they've just been playing a little bit better. They are a force to be reckoned with. They are a force of nature right now. And the Bolts have to figure out how exactly they're going to slow them down. They've got a good wall that can dam up the ocean and slow things down. Maybe not the ocean, like a really strong river, I guess, or something like that.
Sure.
But I think that they really have to figure out, picks, where they go in, how they're going to prioritize the Kings, and who they're targeting.
BigManTingz the target right now. Big team fight brewing as Haddix has gone big with his ultimate, and BigManTingz simply being tossed around at BaRRaCCuDDa on a killing spree. Finds his third of the game and the third of the game for the Bolts. Variety, though, able to answer back as the Jing backing away. Back by Pyromancer in another 1-for-1 trade. LASBRA down in exchange for BMT.
Yeah, BMT is worth a little more right now, although LASBRA is like the capability to wrap around to get to someone like Netrioid. That's going to be painful to lose if you're the Bolts. But you get rid of the Merlin, so that should, and that's a very capital asterisk, should slow down the Fire Giant for the Kings. And it does slow it down, but it doesn't stop them, apparently.
It's going to be up to BaRRaCCuDDa. The Camelot Kings again. A perfect objective call. Rotate in. Variety, even with this health and shred build that BaRRaCCuDDa's got, dealt nearly no damage to Variety. And this is the style of Kings that we got none of in game 1 or 2, right? I mean, by the end of game 2,
it was there.
The Kings were able to team fight back in. But the style of controlling the entire map in a very low kill game has been the MO of the Kings all year long. It's not something we got in game 1, not something we got until maybe the very end of game 2 with that Phoenix call. And now the Camelot Kings have done it effectively all of game 3, and it's the Bolts who are fighting against a massive deficit.
And it's, difficult, right? Because you're in a position where not only has the deficit been just continually growing, there's not a whole ton that you can do with it. You've got 4 members with Fire Giant on the other side. You're looking at some people already getting close to finishing their 6th slot. That is going to be, I think, where a lot of this gold is going. But there is, again, a little bit of relics, a minute down where Tings doesn't have beads. Shells are going to be gone for another 40 seconds. So going into a Phoenix right now for the Kings could still be a little risky. Wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, take the tier 2, back away. You've got a lot of pressure in mid. You've got Oni minions as well coming down the lanes. You could and should, in my mind, clear up the rest of these towers. And then once your relics are back up, that's when you can start looking towards one of these Phoenixes. They might be able to surge forward in mid, though.
Variety. Walk forward. A wall from Jake. Just delays out a bit of damage and actually sets up some for CaptainTwig. This is where Venenu needs to go big. The poke damage, the range damage from the Yu Huang. You don't get a lot of opportunities around a tier 2. It just goes down so quickly. But a bit further back where you're able to send out the long-range poke, the burst damage, connects potentially onto Twig. It's an ideal target who might be playing a bit further forward than Tings or Netrioid would be. That's where the Bolts need to hang their hat. Sven hasn't been able to do much. Granted, with a low kill, low pressure game that we've gotten, nobody has been able to do all that much. The Camelot Kings open up the entire map and with a minute and 45 second score. Able to go back, grab the Pyromancer, and again with the Pyromancer passive it gives you, it might be able to get back out on the map and give this one more chance with a minute and a half left. Spend up some of that 2K plus gold for everyone on the Kings.
I mean, this is one of those moments where I wish I had like the Telestrator pin like active so I could just draw on the map, because it goes from Fire Giant back, down to the Fury, down the left lane, over to mid, over to right, and then back to the Pyromans. Like, that was just a trip across the map in terms of getting gold. Nothing but getting paid for the Kings. And being able to do it all in the first 2.5 minutes of the power play is incredible for them, because that lead, they already had a massive gold amount in their pockets. But now you're looking at 2 E-staffs that are online, Variety and Tings both back, get a tier 3. Twig gets the Arondite as well. So you opened up huge power spikes for a lot of your players. Health for Tings, I mean, look at those bars. He's going to be able to survive a little bit longer in these fights. You buy time for your relics to come up, and you set yourselves up, admittedly for not a lot of time, but still about a minute to play around with around these Phoenix pushes with your relics up. It might not be a huge team fight. They might not be able to find their way in. They only have 30 seconds to do so. If the Bolts can hold this line, which they're good at, they're going to be able to hold a little.
Wow, how about this style of play from the Kings? And the Horus ultimate over to the right side of the map, but if the Olympus Bolts read it, no, LASBRA has the book shut. The CaptainTwig will find the first kill of the fight. The Camelot Kings sensing maybe a game-ending team fight if the remainder is clean enough. Haddix has used his ultimate, sends some damage and some CC towards the Camelot Kings. Awesome Jake's wall, though, actually prevents a decent amount of damage, and now we're back to the left side in the mid lane, Phoenix, but CaptainTwig has taken a mountain of damage, and Venenu finishes off the kill, makes it a 1-for-1 trade, and only the mid Phoenix goes down.
I mean, if you're going to be able to talk about it, you save a little bit. No, they're going in. That's going to be a toss back. Haddix is surrounded.
Uh-oh. Awesome Jake was able to avoid the pullback, but BigManTingz reads the dash, and Haddix goes down. And now some low health targets on the Olympus Bolts means the Kings can hang around. Fire Giant buff is no more, and Haddix is gone for 50 seconds. Maybe you just usher in some of these minion waves, see if you can get some Trebuchet value. Fire Giant won't be up for about 20 or so seconds. If you can get this Phoenix, your life becomes a lot easier around an enhanced Fire Giant if you're the Kings.
And look at this. I mean, good play from Netrioid. Only hit 1 shot, but Vin is just out of this fight. He can't get aggressive the way he needs to.
That is absurd.
I don't think with the Fire Giant coming, respawning, you know, no FG buff, you're really just pushing this Trebuchet up, seeing if you can press your luck a little bit if you are the Kings. But now you're in a good spot. You can back. Admittedly, you don't have the Pyro passive anymore, but you're going to be able to reset, no worries. It's a 4v5 with fire minions. So you'll be able to go up and set up for an AFG pretty easily.
And you're going to do it 12,000 gold ahead. BigManTingz has really stepped up here in Game 3 on the Merlin. Because again, you know, Game 1 and Game 2, quiet from Tings, the rest of the Kings in general, yes. But big performance from CaptainTwig in Game 2 on the Vamana to run down the back line. BigManTingz off the mark a couple times with the Krakens. This time the Merlin has really looked good. Awesome Jake. It's not that hard to predict, is it? You know where the Kings are, and Jake steps too far forward. Now Ven and BaRRaCCuDDa both disengaging. Ven won't be finished off yet, but BigManTingz has got the fix, and he's got it in quickly. BigManTingz on a double kill. Ven and Jake back in base.
Yeah, you can choose one of 2 options, and I like the route the Kings are going. This is a free FG. Free FG means that you're going to get a free Phoenix, and with the time that you have, Jake might respawn by the time you're sieging the base, but you're going to be able to get a lot of pressure in a 3v5, potentially 4v5. Yeah, very, very aggressive. Not only that, but like in the middle of vision, like, you know, like you said, you know they're going to be walking up. You know that they're going to be looking around this pit. And you know that as a Ymir, not only are you slow, but they've got tons to shut you down. It definitely ends up coming back to bite the Bolts.
And the Camelot Kings in a 1 versus 2 seed matchup bring us the distance after turning around game number 2 and are now knocking on the doors of being the sole owners of first place after a phase where we have been desperate for these 2 teams to meet. Their matchup has done some justice, I think. Bolts run over in game 1, close back and forth in game 2, and now the scale tilt towards the Kings ever so heavily into game number 3. Fire minions working their way down both mid and right. As a full 5 respawn is in, the Bolts maybe realize their best chance at delaying this game, at winning this game, is not finding underneath their Titan.
I think they've got a good chance for a defense look. Ymir walls, we've seen what they can do. Just taking some of the autos away, blocking attacks onto the Phoenix is going to buy you time. You've got a Yu Huang, you've got good wide autos from BaRRA. So a lot of these narrow corridors going into the Phoenix, you're at least going to be able to combat back at. But you've got good damage. Once Netrioid, if he pops that ult as aggressively as we've seen in the past, that's going to be a huge opener for the Kings to be able to just walk forward.
This Phoenix is an afterthought now for the Camelot Kings, simply whenever they want to engage. 3 Phoenixes down now. Mid will respawn shortly, and the Camelot Kings will...
It's rule number 2, double tap.
That's right, you got to double tap. Get the mid lane Phoenix down one more time. Variety walks forward. Watch out for the Whirlwind of Rage and Steel. Watch out for Genetics as well. On the rotation in behind, mid lane Phoenix up, and immediately back down. The Olympus Bolts as 5 back their way in towards their own Titan, just waiting on that moment of engage. Ben takes half of his health and damage. Centaurus flies in from Netrioid and does half of BaRRaCCuDDa's health bar, who's got to go back to the fountain and reset. But the Camelot Kings score still slow playing this. No full engage into the Titan room.
If Variety can disengage for a little bit, that's going to be it. But no, it's Haddix instead leading the way. Look at LASBRA.
Uh-oh, where's Genetics going to go? He's going to back the team out of the base.
I love that.
And Haddix's ultimate is now delayed as the Camelot Kings backpedal. But Variety takes a whole chunk of damage on his way into the fight. And the Olympus Bolts seemingly have kept their Titan on the map.
At least keeping the Titan going, but they don't have much else to defend. Look, there's still a minute and a half of the power play. This Fire Giant's gonna go. Variety backs, teleports in, still has ult, and can really lead the way forward for the team.
Fire minions will be here shortly. The Bolts not too worried about that. They'll clear those minion waves just by dealing with the Camelot Kings. Again, damage from Netrioid, pushing the Olympus Bolts back into their fountain. Genetics standing, tanking up the Titan as Variety walks forward in as well, but BaRRaCCuDDa's got damage for the front line of the Camelot Kings. LASBRA has got to leave, but Netrioid says no way to that one. The Olympus Bolts have lost their jungler. Centaurus out once more. No detonate damage to finish off the kills, but the Camelot Kings walk into the Titan room, and there is simply too much, and the Camelot Kings gain their crown on top of the SPL.
I mean, they just play that. It's such a good pace for them, right? They don't get too aggressive in the Phoenix. They don't get too aggressive in the Titan room. A lot of patience around that squad to make sure that it's not going to be an overextension from themselves. And you had mentioned it, you know, playing around that left side Phoenix, it was an afterthought. It wasn't the Phoenix that they were worried about, it was the positioning of the Bolts. And the minute they pressured out LASBRA a little bit in mid, the rest of the team moves forward. Netrioid just throws a few stray autos over, the bird goes down, they can then move over to mid, easy enough. Then it's just how do you pierce the base. And I have to give big shout outs to Variety of all people, because Variety pulls a lot of abilities. Genetics with a beautiful ult gets them out of there. But that teleport back in for Variety, he gets the back, full heal, full mana, and he maintained his ult. It was just a lot of pressure that really just ruined the Bolts.
Gore, this is really like a slide scale of a set. Game 1 all for the Bolts, Game 2 back and forth, Game 3 swings to the Camelot Kings, who grabbed their win over the Bolts and now stand atop alone of the SPL. That's it for Gore Miser, and I will go back to the desk to break down the set.
So much, Dave and Gore. An outstanding performance out of the Kings, now able to net themselves at the top of the SPL, at least for as far as this week is concerned, finding a victory over their counterparts who was sitting at the top of the throne with them. Now the Camelot Kings are the ones who stand tall with a Game 3 win over the Olympus Bolts. A lot of shouts to Variety on this Xing Chen, able to create a ton of space for his team, able to soak up so many sets of purification beads in those last couple of engagements just alone. So many ultimates had to get expended just to get out of these Whirlwind of Rage and Steel. And got to throw props over to Genetics. I mean, there's a reason that this god got nerfed immediately after he brought him into the SPL, and there's a reason why he only brings this god out every so often, because when he does, it is always a show, Mifflin.
The front line of the Camelot Kings deserve every single bit of credit that we can laud upon them, because really that play was just magnificent. Anytime the Camelot Kings are able to establish their win condition, it feels like the downward spiral for the opposition. For the Olympus Bolts fans, had to have just had a sinking feeling in their stomach, because the base slowly gets broken apart. You're methodically poking and prodding your way into the Titan room. It's just clean, slow play from the Camelot Kings. I'm not sure if Panic End is even in their playbook. I've not once seen these guys go for a 50-50 on the Titan room. I would love to go back and just get the stats in the Camelot Kings. If we're hitting the Titan's probably just dying. That's what it feels like when they play. But you got to talk about how they got there, and there's a whole lot of the exact style of macro play that we've seen from the Camelot Kings in the past. Greater Scorpion, mid camps, every single bit of it controlled throughout the early portions. Once the team fight rolled through, gotta, again, talk about that front line. Variety and genetics earn every single bit of the praise we can give to them.
1-0-7 and 0-1-7 for Variety and Genetics, respectively. BigManTingz able to put out a 4-1 and 4 KD of his own. And Netrioid holding his own on this Chiron. Those Centaurus shots late game were taking a third of BaRRaCCuDDa's health bar anytime one of those connected. And luckily for BaRRaCCuDDa, only 1 or 2 were connecting, and then the masterful shot not quite enough to finish out the job there. Otherwise, we could have seen some long-range, but essentially solo kills coming from Netrioid there. And speaking of Netrioid, we actually got a standing by for our post-game interview here with the Camelot Kings. Netrioid, congratulations on the win. How does it feel for your team now being at that definitive top of the standings for the SPL in this phase so far?
This is really good because we have been having some problems like last year and maybe the beginning of this year. Standing on the top is like a really brief relief, I will say. So yeah, it feels amazing.
And facing off against a team like the Bolts, they're playing a lot of very traditional style of SMITE. You guys and a lot of the other teams in the SPL are trying a whole bunch of new things. I mean, how does it really feel, you know, and what's kind of the difficulties of facing a team like the Olympus Bolts?
I will say the way they play the map, when they get pressure, they will like punish you for that. For example, you can see it in the game 1. Our gods weren't like these early game gods at all, and they kind of punish us. So I will say they have that unique game style, and we just adapted for game 2 and game 3 for that.
Yeah, game 2, you're able to make that comeback. Game 3, you guys kind of held the reins of the control throughout that one. For you over in the dual lane, you know, playing with a player like Genetics, he's got such a Versus God pool himself. You've been changing up your pool. I mean, how has that dynamic over in the dual lane been evolving over the last couple of years for you two?
It is really, I would say it is really interactive when I play with Genetics in the lane, because we always, like, whenever we will die or whenever we will do some mistakes, he will tell me what I did wrong, I will tell him what I did wrong. The next, for example, time that happens, we already know what to do that, and we don't even have to talk anymore, so we already know what each other is doing.
Well, it sounds like y'all gonna get head on your shoulders over there. Congratulations on your win, Netrioid. Get back with the team celebrating. Congrats on your win.
Thank you.
Very calm, collected out there out of Netrioid. A lot of great words coming from him as well. And talking about, you know, just his partner in that dual lane. Being able to immediately just talk with your dual lane partner, whether it be on the spot or after a game, and then be able to make adaptations based off mistakes or good things that you have done. It's got to be a big boon over for that dual lane. The Kings. It shines here in game number 1, 2, and 3 for this team as they're able to find themselves a win over the Olympus Bolts. Let's take a look at the schedule, because this is only our first set of the day. I mean, I know we're picking at
4:30.
Yeah, it's almost 4:30 in the afternoon, but what a great set to start our Saturday off. And now we'll be closing out our day with the Atlantis Leviathan, the Valhalla Valkyries, and then the Leviathans will come back again tomorrow to start off our triple header of SMITE on Sunday against the Solar Scarabs, Dragons, and Titans. Another set to look for, and the Camelot Kings and the Oni Warriors. We'll see if the Kings can continue their run after today, find a win up against the Warriors, or can the Warriors once again kind of play spoiler to one of these top-end teams. And with the win out of the Camelot Kings, a 5-1 record to nearly close out their first full half of the phase. Remember, this is a double round robin between these, so being able to sit at 5-1, potentially 6-1 with the win out there is a great start to your phase.
Man, the Camelot Kings right at the top. I am sure they are just so angry at the Leviathans, right? I mean, how dare you ruin our season from 4th seed? The Leviathans, of course, looking to advance themselves up the bracket as well, as they are matching with the Valkyries right after this. I'm expecting that match to be interesting for multiple reasons, a multitude of reasons. One, if you've been paying attention on Twitter, I'm hearing Benny Q's got a tweak or a flight coming up, so maybe you're worried a little bit of that, or, you know, and anytime the Valkyries get to play, always a treat to watch because of how, well, diplomatic, how unique they approach the game. They are a team that are just doing their own thing at all times, and it's a complete clash of mentalities where the Valkyries are just such a unique team. The Leviathans are like, if Reddit could just make the dream squad, well, we're going to play just classical SMITE at its best. So I think we're in for a treat in this next set.
And it is a little bit of a rematch, because the only win that the Valkyries did find last phase at the very least was against the Atlantis Leviathan. So this is a completely revitalized Leviathans team. Can the Valkyries redo it one more time in phase 2, or Leviathan's going to run away with it? We'll find out for set 2 right after this.